Welcome everyone to the Environment Committee meeting. Members of the public may like to follow @London Assembly on Twitter and use the hashtag Assembly Environment for this meeting. Please may I remind everyone to switch phones to silent mode and ask that members and guests ensure that electronic devices are not placed in front of their microphones. Today, our main item of business is a discussion on a green and just transition for London's businesses. Before we begin, we have a few items of business to attend to. Can I now ask our committee clerk, Jack Booth, to confirm any apologies for today's meeting?
Thank you, Chair. We have no apologies for absence.
Thank you, Jack. Declarations of interest. Can I ask the committee to note the recommendations set out at item 2 and ask if members have any other interest to declare? Assembly Member Cooper.
I'm not... And I'll just borrow a microphone that is working. I'm not sure if this counts as an interest, but one of our guests is here from the London Sustainable Development Commission and will be, and it's just arrived, in fact, actually. Hello. I'm actually represent the Assembly I sit as a commissioner on behalf of the Assembly appointed by the Mayor, so I don't know whether I need to just report that that is the case.
Thank you for your transparency. Anyone else? No, thank you very much. Item 3, minutes. Can we confirm the minutes of the Environment Committee meeting held on 20th October 2022 and the notes of the informal meeting held on 10th of November 2022 to be signed by me as correct records? Thank you. Summary list of actions. Can I ask the committee to note the completed, outstanding and closed actions arising from previous meetings and additional correspondence received? Thank you. We now move on to our main item of business, a discussion with invited guests on a green and just transition for London's businesses. We've divided today's session into 2 separate panels, and I would like to welcome our first panel of guests. We're joined in the chamber by Shirley Rodrigues, Deputy Mayor for Environment and Energy. Welcome, Shirley. And Catherine Barber, Assistant Director of Environment and Energy, GLA. And welcome back, Catherine. Thank you for joining us. We'll begin by inviting the Deputy Mayor to give some short opening remarks. Oh, sorry, your mic's not on. There we go.
How's that? Yep.
Perfect.
Thank you, Chair. Well, since we last met, we've obviously had COP27. The Mayor has raised the leadership role of cities with his fellow mayors as chair of C40. And one of the things that they've really flagged is the fact that collectively nation states are moving as fast as we need to meet the 1.5 degree limit, not target. But mayors are doing a lot in their action. They're very, very keen to see what London is doing in a whole range of things, from greening our streets, rewilding, but also, in fact, the ultra-low emission zone, which has inspired many other C40 cities to start to follow suit. And as a result of that, they've seen a 5% reduction in air pollution. And they're very keen to see the recent announcement about the expansion of the ultra-low emission zone London-wide. And the reason we're doing that, as you know, is for health. 5 million Londoners would breathe cleaner air as we expand the zone out to London. And we know that there are 4,000 premature deaths, many hundreds of thousands of people suffering from asthma and related diseases. And we know that there are a few vehicles still causing this pollution, and the ultra-low emission zone is a proven measure to reduce those numbers of vehicles on the road rather. But in order to help them, and in recognition of the cost of living crisis, the Mayor has provided an unprecedented scrappage scheme, £110 million, extended the eligibility, bringing in new and extended grace periods, as well as other eligibilities. But alongside that, in terms of the cost of living crisis, today, the Mayor has issued a severe weather warning. We are facing a winter where people are struggling to heat their homes. And we have been doing an awful lot at the GLA, but also in conjunction with our London local authorities to promote energy advice and do as much as we can on retrofitting. Together, we're helping to retrofit homes through the Mayor's Warmer Homes programme, through our retrofit accelerators, helping to support businesses, roll out renewables, and so on. But the problem with this, as ever, is the challenge we face. We're not really collectively moving at pace to help people and to hit those to meet those limits. And one of the good things is that we're working through the Recovery Board on the Green New Deal mission that we're going to talk about in order to really up that pace. But collectively too, I think we're all calling on government to help us do more. It's very welcome to see some of the recent government announcements, like yesterday's announcements on schools and energy efficiency retrofit measures there, but that's nowhere near what we need and what they need. So we stand ready to work with the government and with others to do more. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. And I believe the last time I saw you, which was just before COP27, we were both at a school awards where schools were being rewarded for their climate initiatives. I just want to put on record my thanks for both the invitation to be there, but also how inspiring that event was. You just referenced the freezing temperatures that are expected to arrive this evening, and obviously that'll be a worry to many Londoners. We also saw this summer examples of extreme heat as well.
Yeah.
What are these climate-related events telling us about the risks in London, and do we need new or even different adaptations?
Well, I think what we're seeing is that it's happening here in London. The flooding in the summer, the extreme heat event, the heat waves, the fires up in northeast London, all of those things bring very much to home that this is not a faraway issue. It's not flooding in Pakistan or wildfires in America and Australia, even though people may have friends and relatives in those countries. But these are things that are happening here and much more severely than people imagined. The extremes of heat and the extreme sort of rain that we're seeing. And in fact, we've only just come out of a drought. The drought level that Thames Water and Environment Agency have called. So all these things are now. But what is absolutely clear is that...
Sorry, we seem to have lost your mic. It's nothing you've done wrong.
It's red here, though. Yeah. Should I move a bit closer? Is that better? How's that? If I press it in, does that work?
While we fix the tech.
Oh, mine's not here.
Pause the meeting while we fix the tech.
Quite right.
Yeah, but this doesn't go red now.
Yeah, none of them are working.
Yeah, but this doesn't go red.
Yeah, I don't think any are.
No, this is yours.
No, it's on, but it's not working.
Mine's not.
Not normally.
Ah, yeah.
Let's swing this around. Great, thank you. Welcome back to the Chamber at the London Assembly, where we are asking questions of the Deputy Mayor and the Assistant Director for Environment and Energy. Apologies for the interruption, and thanks to the tech team for fixing it so quickly. Deputy Mayor, we were talking about climate risks, and in terms of do we need new or different adaptations in London?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So I was saying, just reminding people of the extreme weather events that we're facing here in London, and that these are coming earlier than people expected, that was forecast, and more severely. What is clear is that we have to face these impacts now. They're not ones that we can avoid. So London has to be made more resilient. And you know, the good news is that we have some good strategies in place and some good policies in place, but they're nowhere near enough, I think, to really help ensure that London is completely resilient. We've been working, one of the issues has been that the responsibility for many of the issues, whether it's drought or overheating or surface water flooding, are distributed amongst a range of actors, whether it's the Environment Agency, the London local authorities as flood risk management authorities, or the GLA as a strategic planning authority. So in the absence of having one overall lead, the Mayor has taken a convening role to make sure that, for example, on surface water flooding, that we're bringing people together. And actually the first meeting of the development of a surface water flooding strategy for London is convening on Thursday. And this is after the round tables that the Mayor convened after the flash flooding events about over a year ago, essentially, where we've come together with the water companies, Ofwat and others to start work on how we do that. But in the meantime, we've been doing things like, for example, issuing warnings and to people in basements, who might be at risk of flooding, warning them of the potential risk, what they might be able to do to make themselves safe, but also reminding them that risk always, cannot be prevented. So that, there is an issue there about people, I think, understanding that they have to manage those risks as well. The National Infrastructure Commission have just published a new report talking about the resiliency of London and others, the UK's infrastructure. And, we don't know what the cost of that would be. In London, we know that the cost roughly to make London net zero by 2030 is roughly in the order of £75 billion. But to make all our homes, our infrastructure, our NHS and so on resilient, the UK doesn't know that number. It's something that the CCC, the Committee on Climate Change, have been asking government to do more on. We've been doing quite a lot of work and trying to understand that, but we're still a long way off.
Thank you, and good to hear that the flooding group are going to meet. I note that the Mayor made a commitment by the end of the year, so mid-December is by the end of the year, so he got there just in time. What is your top priority in terms of managing climate risks?
In terms of managing climate risks, I think it's making sure that people understand the risks to them and their families and their, and their property. I think that's the big concern. And obviously, as the Mayor of London, through his various strategies and social media and so on, he can sort of raise awareness of that. But we will not have the local knowledge that, for example, the London local authorities would have, or, for example, the priority register that Thames Water and other water companies might have, or the utility companies. So that's why collectively we have to work on that resilience. Deputy Mayor Fiona Twycross and through the London Resilience Forum and the strategy, they keep an oversight of the emergency response element of that, which is the most immediate thing. And my role, but working very closely with her and Jules on planning and many others in the Mayor's office, is about how do we ensure the medium to long-term resilience of London. And that is through, for example, the planning policies primarily, but then again, working on projects and lobbying government for more funding and powers to help us with that.
Thank you. Now, before I hand over to my colleagues, finally, my question, this is more as an Assembly member rather than as Chair, because we don't have an agreed committee position on this. But we need to clean up London's air, and we absolutely agree on that. We also know that it disproportionately affects people from communities of colour and working class communities. And Newham has some of the worst air pollution in London, and we've just been talking there about climate risks. We also know that induced traffic demand means that if you build more roads, more traffic will come. How do you square this with building the Silvertown Tunnel?
Well, the Silvertown Tunnel will have a charge, and so is going to be within the ultra-low emission zone, and the ultra-low emission zone applies to Blackwall Tunnel. We have, that collectively with the Silvertown Tunnel sort of bus services and so on will manage that demand. So when we did the when this was taken through the planning permission route, and it was looked at very extensively through that process, the air quality benefits were modelled, and so were the carbon benefits. So we're very confident that there will be none or minimal air quality in benefits, if that's a word.
But on the air quality point, I know that, for instance, with ULEZ, we went for 20 metres per microgram cubed because that was what the World Health Organization limits when they were tightened. But Silvertown Road Tunnel was planned with 40 micrograms cubed. Doesn't this need reassessing now that the scientists are telling us differently?
Well, you have to take this as it's one infrastructure project in the whole of London. So collectively, the Mayor has set a WHO, is aiming for a WHO 10 by 2030. And obviously, we're lobbying very hard for government to work to the new WHO interim guidelines. So collectively across London, that's what we're working on. And as you'll have seen from the emissions reductions that we've seen across London, just from the central London low emission zone, ultra low emission zone, we've seen a 50% cut almost in roadside concentrations there, and across London we're seeing emissions falling. But if you were to pick individual projects, then they will have slightly different levels. But through our air pollution policies in the London Plan, our air quality positive policies and our air quality neutral policies, these are all things that collectively we're trying to make sure that we manage.
I have lots more questions, but I will show restraint as chair and move on. Assemblymember Cooper.
Thank you. Do you think we're making enough progress in terms of improving resilience in relation to climate risks? And I mean both in terms of adaptation and mitigation. Storms, heat waves, wildfires are clearly becoming more frequent. Are we really doing enough?
I think we're doing as much as we can within the powers that we have. But one of the things that we've been asking government for is to recognise that this is a huge issue for not just London, but for every city in the UK. The sorts of things that we've been doing, we've been lobbying for example, to cut emissions in our buildings, to devolve the ability to set minimum energy efficiency standards, to, for example, on adaptation and heat, to think about where the strategic role for that should be. So in the absence of that, as I've said, we have to work with the powers and the sort of distribution of powers that we have and the responsibilities. So we have been working with, as I've said, some of the regulators, local authorities and businesses through the London Recovery Board and the Green New Deal mission. Adaptation and resilience is a key part of the actions there. So, whether it's how we can help through retrofit to make buildings more resilient, through to greening our streets to make them more shady, to protect ourselves from overheating down the line. There are a whole host of issues that are being covered, for which the Mayor has put some funding in, but we're trying to make, for example, the budget that he's just published, those are based on the missions. That really sets the strategy and approach that we should all be following.
Do you think there is enough guidance, though, really, that indicates what we all should be doing? Because you just referred to the restriction on powers, and clearly that is the case. So, for example, as the number of emissions associated with mobility have declined, then the number of emissions as a percentage overall of what London pumps out, the percentage that's associated with both domestic dwellings but also with offices has increased as a percentage of what we're doing. Do you think there's enough guidance, for example, for businesses in terms of what they should be doing in their offices to mitigate and adapt? We're going to talk a lot about businesses today, so I'm particularly interested in that area.
From government, you mean? Or
Yeah, from government and then cascading down to regional authorities like the GLA and then cascading down to local authorities. Is there enough guidance and assistance?
I'm not sure there is. But in the absence of that, we have, as I mentioned, the CCC calling on government to reflect this and to take this further. We've been working with local authority associations, UK 100, the M10, the Mayor's Network, and also with London councils to create our own approach and guidance in the absence of that. So many of the things that we've been doing at the GLA, London Councils has its various climate action programmes and work plans, and we work together with them on how we might provide some of that advice, whether it's through to London and Partners, providing sort of frameworks on or our own business hub that's providing advice and guidance, our London plan, some of the projects that we provide that no doubt we'll get into in a bit later. Those are things that we're collectively trying to do, and the environment strategy does set, and obviously the economic development strategy does try to set that out at high level. But as things change, yes, we definitely need more guidance.
I mean, we're almost at the end of 2022 now, and we're still talking about advice and guidance, and yet we look globally, and the Director General of the United Nations is becoming more and more agitated in terms of public statements and saying we're just not moving fast enough. And whilst I'm very happy that there is a coalition of the willing, and we heard some inspirational stories from some of the businesses that we went to talk to, we had a round table up in Hackney. We've also got an awful lot of people who are unwilling or don't know what they should be doing.
Yeah.
Should we not now be moving beyond advice and guidance to have any hope of getting anywhere near where we need to be by 2030, let alone by 2040 or 2050? Aren't we now just lagging behind? Don't we need something a bit more strenuous?
Yeah, no, absolutely. The Mayor has been calling on a retrofit package, for energy efficiency, whether it's for our homes or for businesses for a long time. And he's not alone. Many businesses themselves have been calling on this. And, there's a huge economic opportunity there, whether it's from green jobs, reskilling people, but what is needed is that loud, long, certainty of policy, not the chopping and changing. A sort of stable policy regime is needed, and a stable funding regime. We deal with a funding regime from government that is a year-long bidding process, and by the time you get funding, you're losing time because you're trying to ramp up to delivery, and then you're given a cut-off that never moves, so that you're not able to spend the funding that is absolutely deserved, that you've made the case for, whether it's homes in London or commercial businesses or whatever. Something that would allow a more stable funding regime that is long, that would allow the businesses to skill their supply chain and build a supply chain. Businesses have been burnt by the Green Deal that government put in and then took out very quickly. Our own planning policies, the Code for Sustainable Homes was going to be implemented and pulled. Luckily in London we were able to carry on, and there's proof there of the importance of that regime. We're able to demonstrate that we're delivering 46%, nearly 50% above building regulations because of those tough policies in London, that if those codes for sustainable homes had stayed in, we would have been building much better homes that wouldn't have needed to have been retrofitted as much as we'll do now. And that's what's shocking. We're building, that was a policy that was absolutely brilliant. Bit of lobbying from vested interests has stopped that going forward, and we can't afford to do that.
Yes,
we have a 2030 target.
There's a number of Assembly members around the table and all the members of the Housing Committee who heard me talking fairly endlessly about the Code for Sustainable Homes, and it's such a shame that it was scrapped in 2015, and we are now building homes that we'll have to retrofit. But I'm also concerned that we've set some targets. So, for example,
There will be no new petrol or diesel vehicles sold after 2030. That we will no longer be fitting gas boilers after 2030. We'll only be fitting, I assume, heat pumps and other, either low carbon or zero carbon energy sources in people's homes or in offices, etc. The MEES, the minimum energy efficiency standards, which is due to completely kick in next year. But I don't see the preparation. I don't really see the action towards these targets. I don't really see how we're going to hit these targets. I mean, maybe this is one for Catherine to come in on as well, on MEES and these areas to do with domestic energy. I mean, are we actually seriously going to hit these targets at all?
In the UK, probably not, and probably not in London either, because of that lack of policy regime. But Catherine.
Yeah, I mean, perhaps just to say that's something that's come up in the Fuel Poverty Partnership, which the Mayor convenes with the National Energy Advice and which the Department of Business also sits on. It's something that has been said repeatedly by all stakeholders to the colleagues from the Department for Business, that having greater clarity about what those energy efficiency standards will be. Many submissions were made to the consultation on that, and there was also research done, a toolkit prepared. All of that is really essential for the sector, for whether it's for landlords, whether it's for homeowners, whether it is for the construction sector to prepare themselves. And if something comes out and then is only given a very short time to implement, the market won't be ready. But if it comes out and there's sort of 2 or 3 years to implement it, then we're getting really perilously close to the targets that are set, which are proportionate to the climate crisis.
Thank you. Sorry, unless you wanted to come
I
back
was
in
just
again.
I was just going to add just a couple of more examples. So, if you look at the sort of level of response that the US have just put in with their climate package, but also if you look to Germany or Netherlands, where they've just mandated and are putting a whole load of funding into heat pumps, and this is a response to both to the energy crisis, but also because of the cost of living, and we know that would help in terms of reducing energy bills as well as promoting renewable energy and our transition away from fossil fuels to more renewable energy and help us meet our net zero carbon targets. There's a huge policy and leadership directions from national governments that we're desperate for to see here.
Yes, it now seems like a bit of a mistake to stop all those insulation programmes, and let's hope the government listens to Lord Deben and the Climate Change Committee, even if they're not listening to the London Assembly Environment Committee. But I'll leave it there, Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Assembly Member Balkari, and good to see you looking better.
Thank you. I'm going to just pick up actually on some points that you just made earlier, and also on the Chair's point about Silvertown Tunnel. I'm sure you're not surprised by that. But I was quite startled by your confidence that there will be no impact on air pollution with the Silvertown Tunnel, considering that campaigners, experts have given plenty of evidence to say that there will be an impact. And do you really think that there is sufficient air monitoring that's going to be installed on either end of the tunnel to satisfy your confidence in this area?
Yeah, absolutely, because as I've said, that there was extensive modelling and remodelling done because there were new emissions factors that were issued during that process. So the air pollution models were rerun. In terms of air pollution monitors, the development consent order mandated certain things. The Mayor has asked TfL and others to put extra monitoring in, which they funded. So that plus the reference framework, the monitoring framework that already exists, plus the local authority's own monitoring network and diffusion tubes, there's certainly a lot of monitoring going on there. Those reports, there is a Silvertown implementation group, which is with all the local authority representatives, that monitors and that looks at and publishes those monitoring data. So, it's all there, all transparent.
We were talking about the way we could encourage different modes of transport within the Silvertown. Can you just give us a little bit of an update from your perspective on ensuring things like cycles, cargo bikes, that type of mode of transport through the Silvertown Tunnel?
Well, I'm not sure about the cargo bikes, but I know that cycles can go on the buses through Silvertown Tunnel. I'd have to take that away, but I don't think there's any different proposals to what's being published and what's being implemented at the moment. So I don't know if there's anything specific you were after.
Just, I'm interested to know how much you know about the campaign itself in terms of their concerns about how the Silvertown Tunnel is going to be built, whether it's actually going to allow a different type of transport that actually will be, more, amenable to the fact that we do want to reduce air pollution.
So the Silvertown Tunnel, as you know, is being built as we speak, and so it's being built to a certain design, and that doesn't facilitate, if I understand correctly from the campaigners, is they want it to be a purely public transport cargo bike tunnel. That isn't how it's being built. No.
I'm going to move on to some other points that you were making earlier about the issues on fire and wildfires particularly. And I'd like to know how you are working with the Deputy Mayor of Fire Resilience on a long-term plan, particularly on the financial pressure that this will impact on the London Fire Brigade. What's your understanding on the impact that it will have on the London Fire Brigade financially? What have you put in place in terms of your work with the Deputy Mayor on fire and resilience in dealing with it in long term, particularly because of the fact that this is actually going to be a concern that we probably will have to deal with again quite shortly?
Yeah, so Fiona, the Deputy Mayor for Fire and Resilience, leads that area of work. So she has oversight of the fire brigade and their budget. But we work very closely together to understand what the risks are to London that then she would discuss with the chief fire officer to make sure that those risks and what they cost would entail. And not all of that is obviously going to fall to the fire brigade to fund. This is partly a lobbying ask from government about how do they make those resources available, because it's about improving the infrastructure to London as well as the emergency response service. If you want more details on how they've incorporated those risks into their budget and business planning, then I can certainly write to you afterwards in consultation with Fiona on how that's happening. But more generally, certainly on net zero, and in terms of decarbonising the fire brigade and the other functional bodies, we've just issued, and they have just issued their own climate budgets. But as I've said, they are very aware of the resilience issues. Transport for London, for example, have put in budget to look at how they understand the risks and can start to make the adaptations to the transport network. So this is a very live issue for all the deputy mayors who lead the functional bodies, and our role is to provide the information and advice and any guidance that we can offer on what those risks might be and where there are possible solutions and options to take.
And I think the chair would be happy with that. Would you have that extra information from you? Yeah. And another point on the wildfires. Now, the mayor in the 2020 London Resilience strategy, he stated that in the middle of the century we can expect London's climate to resemble that of Barcelona, which I thought was quite interesting. Has he actually done any investigation learning from cities like Barcelona about how they're tackling wildfires?
Yes, actually, and I'm trying to remember who it was that So we've been through the C40. We've had the conversation with other cities, for example, on what the how are they responding to wildfires, whether it's those in California, and I just can't remember her name, but the mayor of, can you remember who it is? No, anyway, but we can write to you with the name. So they've met, so their respective fire services have talked to each other about their experiences, and we've asked for the service to start looking wider as well. So whilst there is experiences and knowledge that can be shared, obviously each city is going to be at a different state, different terrain, different approaches. So, what is suitable for one city is not necessarily suitable for another. But I think understanding what those risks are and understanding how differently people have approached things is very critical and is happening. And, you know, I should say that, you know, this is just because, you know, I've had the conversation with Fiona, you know, the fire service talks to other fire services, so their counterparts in the country, you know, just over, you know, outside the M25 with Essex and so on, they have shared services agreements and so on. So it's not something that is unique to London. Everybody's looking at it, you know, whether it's heathland or peat fires in the rest of the country. So it's a very live issue.
Thank you. When do you plan to publish the next progress report on the environment strategy, and what's been the cause of the delay?
Well, I provided comments, but I think shortly, wasn't it New Year?
Yes.
Yeah, in the new year.
Okay. And what was the cause of the delay?
I think just capacity. The team are completely overstretched, and I have to pay tribute to the team because we are dealing with a whole massively complicated work programme because the Mayor wants to make London the greenest city in the world, and we're doing, you know, not badly, I think, but we have a lot to do. But we've been faced with lots and lots of challenges, you know, whether it's, you know, from COVID through to now the cost of living, where I think people have had to change direction and try to keep the existing work programme going with additions. So when we're trying to prioritise things, I think we're focusing on the most immediate responses like the wildfires or the flooding, or, you know, how do we turn our hand to helping on the energy advice line that we've just launched, as well as other things. So it is in train, and you will get it in the new year.
Okay, brilliant. 2018 implementation plan for the environment strategy set out actions to take forward between 2018 and 2023. As we enter the final year of the plan, can you set out what is on track and what is proving to be the biggest challenge to achieve?
As far as I remember, I think there's an awful lot in there, and I think it's pretty much all on track. I think, as ever, the usual thing would be we would want to go further and faster, and, you know, we've already talked about funding and powers. Those are the sorts of things that impede. So you have to prioritise where you can move ahead, and then things come at you sideways, and so you have to change your focus and your priorities. But I think, given that, you know, certainly when I checked last, we had either completed quite a few things and are moving on to new areas. So, for example, on air pollution, you know, we've been talking about expanding the ultra-low emission zone. That's a huge focus. Looking at indoor air pollution, we've been doing some work on that. That's a big focus. You know, we've been talking to our health colleagues about how do we respond to the coroner's prevention of future deaths report after the second inquest into the death of Ella Kissy Deborah that found air pollution as a cause of death. You know, one of the big issues there was how we can work with local authorities and public health authorities to do more to raise awareness. So that's a big focus of our work. These are all new things that have come up since the environment strategy was published. So obviously there are things, as well as the Mayor's manifesto commitments from his second election manifesto. Those are things that we've had to respond to. You know, we were talking about adaptation earlier. The heat events in last summer, the Mayor found some money to provide an extra money for tree planting to provide shade in streets, and the team, you know, who are quite a small team, turned that round within, you know, a month, is in designing it, working with local authorities to come up with opened it, and they have been are now assessing applications. I think we just launched or announced one set of awards. You know, those are the sorts of things that don't feature in your work programme regularly. I mean, they feature there as things that you might want to do, but these are some additional things that they have to turn their hand to. So capacity-wise and implementation-wise, I think, you know, it's pretty good.
So would you say one of the challenges has been the speed of trying to get everything done?
The speed? No, because I think the team worked very well and very fast. I think it's more that we have a 2030 target for net zero. We have a target for trying to meet the WHO interim guideline by 2030 as well. What is stopping us from working at pace is the collective ecosystem, you know, the ability to have control, the funding, and the either clear accountabilities of who's leading and who's delivering. Those are the sorts of things that slows things down. So in the absence of some of those things, you have to work in collaboration at the pace of those of others often. So you might want to go faster, but others who may not have the capacity or the funding can't work as fast. So you may have to go a bit slower. Sorry, Catherine. Yeah.
If I could just come in briefly, I think something that I've seen with the change of the target from 2050 being brought forward to 2030 for net zero, which is commensurate with the climate crisis, is that it's required a shift in mentality of people who are making investments. We see it with the GLA group itself when we have conversations about vehicle replacements or heating system replacements. If previously there was a belief that we could have one more round with fossil fuel-based infrastructure, now our colleagues are wrestling with the fact that the next time they invest in might have been a gas boiler, next time will it be a heat pump, might have been a fossil fuel-based vehicle or a hybrid, next time it's got to be electric. That just takes a bit of forcing through the system. We're doing it inside the GLA group. We have to just help all of Londoners, whether it's residents, businesses, etc., to understand the implications of that. I think one other thing just to mention is, which I think is a priority for this coming year in terms of achieving all those things that we were set out in the London Environment Strategy, it would be about recycling. Recycling rates have been a bit persistently, stubbornly flat. They were coming down before the pandemic, and then I think at that point household recycling rates were sort of stable, and perhaps because of people working more at home rather than going into offices where perhaps there were sort of better systems for collecting, recycling, things like that. So I think we haven't seen as quick progress on that as we would like to have done over the last 2 or 3 years. And that's something that the team is now working on through the reduction in recycling plans with boroughs who've just submitted their drafts for how they're going to update those. So we're making sure that they've got policies in there which will help to improve recycling rates.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Catherine. That really resonates with something we heard last week, actually, with our informal roundtable with businesses, where they were talking about if we're being asked to hit 2030, then government public bodies simply have to do that. Otherwise, we'll all miss together, and we just can't do that. Assembly Member Devenish.
Good afternoon, Deputy Mayor. You talked about a little bit earlier about flooding, last year's flooding. Can you update us in a bit more detail on the progress in setting up the strategic flood group to address flooding concerns highlighted last summer, please?
Yeah, very happy to. So a sort of office transition group have been working on terms of reference and what a business plan or an initial business plan might look like, membership and so on. So we have our first meeting on Thursday morning. So co-chaired, because this is a transition arrangement, by London Councils and the Environment Agency, with a number of members from local authorities, the flood risk authorities, Thames Water, GLA, myself, and others coming together to talk about how we're going to support the work programme in terms of funding, just to get the work programme kicked off. How do we lobby government and access funding from the Regional Flood and Coastal Committee, who hold the funding from the Environment Agency and ultimately government, and how do we access that for London? And then, the big thing is, the starting work on what is that, what are the measures that we need to come together to agree on, and the strategy for surface water flooding. Some of that will include, how do I say this? It will include making sure that those who, like the water companies and Ofwat, include within their infrastructure plans and their business plans the relevant measures and funding to help us, including things like surface sustainable urban drainage schemes, as well as the sort of bigger infrastructure. But also, what more local authorities might do in managing their roads, what Transport for London might be able to do to do on their TLRN in terms of surface water flooding, and then more generally, how does that connect up with some of the other things that we're doing on greening, for example, so that in the planning system, so we can try and encourage more depaving and more greening to absorb some of that surface water flooding.
And do you have a sort of, I know it won't be as simple, but do you have a sort of complex process diagram that's showing who does what? Because clearly we all know the big issue in flooding is, does it fall under a borough responsibility, an EA responsibility, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Is there, or have you seen such a process diagram? And if you have, could you share it with the committee? And could you also share the membership of this working group? Was it called working group or steering committee?
Steering group. I think.
Steering group, whatever it's called.
Yeah.
If you could share with the committee who exactly from the EA, Thames Water, etc., it'll be quite useful, please.
Yeah, and I think we tried to do that in when the round table was first pulled together. So there is definitely some documentation text. I'm not sure it's in a diagram, but there is a very convoluted process about, for example, when the water hits the road, then it's the local authority function. As soon as it goes into the drain, it's the utility companies, water companies, drainage companies' responsibility. So it is complicated. It doesn't help in terms of then this sort of, well, whose responsibility is it when the leaves are halfway in the drain? Is it the borough, or is it or is it the householder? So, we'll try and get that to you.
Thank you. And what additional resources are the GLA itself dedicating to this work, please?
We have. We're providing some money towards the Secretariat. Can you remember exactly how much? I've got.
I think it's in the order of a few tens of thousands.
Yeah. So initially we put some money towards helping. I'm just scrolling through to see if I can find the number.
But have you got a project director or project manager or somebody who's accountable, who's going to pull this work together, or are you basically passing it off to somebody on a steering group? Steering groups are fantastic things, but my experience of them, you've got to have somebody who sort of pulls it all together.
Yeah. No, absolutely. So this is part of the agenda for the first meeting. So we are trying to pull together a secretariat who will act as the sort of project manager, working between the Greater London Authority, London boroughs, etc., Thames Water. At the moment, what we're trying to agree is how that's funded. So we put some money towards that. The RFCC is going to put some money towards it, and we're checking whether EA, Thames Water, everybody's putting something towards it. And then it's really about the governance and so on. But whilst that the governance is being sorted out, we're not waiting for that to be sorted out. So the work will start. So whilst we're recruiting to those posts, we'll bring people in, whether it's team members within the GLA, working with team members at the London councils, who will share that work to keep that moving until we have those people in place. But absolutely, you're right. We need somebody who is dedicated to working on this. Are they the accountable body? Probably not, because, as I've said, the accountabilities range across a whole bunch of organisations, but at least everybody's recognised this is an issue long overdue to come together and tackle.
And the summer Thames Water report, what do you think of it?
The one that they published earlier this year, it was helpful, but I think it didn't go far enough in feeding into, well, what would they do and how would they change their approach or their business and budget process to tackle this. But, as an input into that surface water work that we're just taking forward, it's very helpful, as was the work that, for example, the London Resilience Group did in terms of the emergency services response, as well as our own analysis as well. So collectively between us, these are all being pulled together into, well, here are some issues that have arisen. How do we resolve these? And things like, what should local authorities be doing, and what, if they don't have the financing or the funding or the powers, what should we be lobbying government to do?
And then the most difficult question, the one I get asked by my residents and my MPs get asked by my residents and my council leaders get asked by my residents, is if a similar unusual level of rainfall on the capital occurs again, are you now confident that London's resilience to flooding events has been improved since summer 2021?
I couldn't hand on heart say, that's true for everywhere in London, because for a start, you can't tell where that rain is going to fall and, where an incident would happen. I think awareness will have risen because, collectively between ourselves, the boroughs, the EA and others, we've made a lot of effort in trying to up the awareness levels of people. I mentioned the leaflets to basement properties, for example, that people are at risk. We've just, I think we're at the end of London Flood Awareness Week, where we've been running a number of sort of events, and not events, but sort of messaging to remind people about, vulnerabilities and what they might do to help make themselves more resilient. But, as I've said, these are not things that we can ever say to people we can stop and that they will never happen again. I think they will happen, and there is something there, about getting people to understand that some of this risk they have to manage themselves. It's unavoidable. There's work that we have to do with insurers for people who can't insure themselves and so on, but which we're doing through the Climate Change Partnership and so on, for example.
Well, I hope you could ask that question at the first meeting tomorrow, because it is the important question that, normal people, my residents are, I've been on the doorstep, literally every time I've been out on the doorstep since last summer, somebody across Westminster or Kensington and Chelsea has raised that with me. I've got one last issue, Chair, and I'll be quick. This is more to do with, you mentioned earlier, Deputy Mayor, that quite understandably you don't control the whole collective ecosystem to make the progress that AM Cooper and the rest of us would like to make faster and faster. Mm-hmm. But there's one area where you do have almost full control, or you being the wider mayoralty, because the mayor does control Transport for London fully. Mm-hmm. So I'm just going to take one issue. And my question really is, why did the mayor prioritise expanding the ULEZ instead of investing in more electric buses, given that the Jacobs report shows a negligible impact on air quality by implementing that expansion? So as Deputy Mayor for Environment, are you able to feed in to say, if you want to make further progress, we've all got limited resources, but you have got a £19 billion budget, and the government did give TfL a very generous settlement. Is that an example where perhaps you could have put the focus differently?
I think we've got the focus right. We have to do both. We have to electrify our buses. We have made them all at least ULEZ compliant, and got the biggest electric fleet in Western Europe because of those prioritisation Transport for London. But we need to do that both for carbon reasons, for climate reasons, as well as for air pollution. But the ultra low emission zone is, to electrify all our buses is going to cost us, at least £1 billion. The ULEZ is considerably less, and any revenue that is raised goes back into public transport. But we've seen that the impact it has in a very little space of time. The central London ULEZ and then the inner London ULEZ, the expansion out there, has had a dramatic impact on cutting air pollution.
It was the outer London ULEZ I was particularly referring to.
Yeah, and we've looked at that very hard and looked at the costs and the benefits. And so whilst the Jacobs reports, I think, says the air quality benefits are negligible, I think that they're taking a very specific issue. But if you look at it in the round, and if you look at it in real terms rather than percentages, it doubles the amount of NOx emissions, for example, that central and inner has provided, does pretty much the same, I think, for carbon emissions. And more than anything, it brings 5 million more Londoners breathing in scope to breathe cleaner air, which is absolutely, brings economic benefits to our city, benefits to the NHS, benefits to social care, and recognising that, as I've said, the Mayor recognises that this will have an impact on certain people, certain businesses, which is why he brought in that unprecedented package of scrappage schemes and extended benefits.
You're very on message, Deputy Mayor. Final question then, in terms of TfL, is there anything else that you feel that you could use this forum today to urge TfL to do more to actually make the challenge we all need to make in 2030 and beyond?
Could they do more? I would urge everyone, we need to do more. It's 2030. But I think you'll have just seen their climate budget, which they've just published alongside many of the functional bodies. It's a start. And obviously we now have to work to how do we prioritise it, how do we fund it? It can't all be done through London. We need private finance, we need public support from government and so on. But I think, with the leadership there, the colleagues that we've been working on, Catherine talked about the challenge of, you've got a sort of an approach that you've been dealing with and you're suddenly having to shift very hard. This isn't unusual, and TfL colleagues at the Met Police, Fire Service, all the functional bodies, and even within the GLA have really risen to the challenge, and I think we're really pleased to see that. It's obviously a start. We have to do a lot more, but very grateful for their help on that.
Thank you. I felt like there were quite a few final questions there, but it's nearly holiday season, so I'll let you off. Deputy Mayor, you gave a series of commitments there to Assembly Member Devonish, particularly around flooding. We have a flooding report coming out soon. To aid us kind of do that investigation for Londoners, would you commit to getting that within the next week, or certainly by Christmas? Well, let's say within the next week, so I shouldn't undermine myself.
Yeah, we can. The membership, that's not a problem, and I think we can provide the text, if not into a diagram, but we can certainly let you know where we think the responsibilities are. Yeah.
Very much appreciated. Thank you. Assembly Member Best.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Catherine and Shirley.
Hi.
Shirley, I imagine you'd probably sign up to the mantra around walking the walk when it comes to politicians and the environment. So I just wondered, what kind of due diligence and thought process did you have around accepting a trip that in itself cost £5,500 to go to Argentina? And which was did have the option to attend virtually to that. So what pushed you to accept that rather large trip with all the emissions instead of joining virtually?
If you're referring to, which I believe you are referring to, my attendance at the C40 summit, Sadiq, the Mayor, is chair of C40 cities. It was a summit that was agreed, and the location was agreed by the previous chair, Mayor Garcetti, in Los Angeles. It was bid for by the Mayor of Buenos Aires. It was the first in-person convening, I think, since 2019, so pre-COVID. And just like COP 26, just like COP 27, just like COP 15, which is happening today, just like the G20, just like the UN meetings, people attend those meetings in person because there are reasons to do that. In-person meetings bring benefits, as you know, in terms of building trust, relationships, being able to share experiences and so on. So, yes, I do look at my trips carefully to make sure that, there is a reason for doing that. And when we go on those trips, they're not holidays, they are working meetings. And I think we've published, as you're aware, my meetings and Sadiq's meetings, they are very full-on days, and we conducted business there. So, yes, of course we look at these things, but we're not saying don't fly anywhere. There is a reason for for people to travel. I have family abroad that I've not seen. I've got a brother in Malaysia who I've not, who came to England after a long time for 3 years. After 3 years because of COVID. We've not been able to see each other for a long time. I've got other family around the world. We make choices, but, I think what we're saying is you have to think about your choices and think about the consequences. And if there are other ways to mitigate, then do.
Completely. Because there was the C40 board meeting in June 2022, and you accepted a trip just shy of $700 to go to that. Was that board meeting a hybrid meeting?
No.
So you had to attend in person?
Yeah, so that, again, most of our board meetings are hybrid. So there was one on Monday, which was a hybrid meeting, but we do have in-person board meetings where we were discussing the, away days and, not away days, a business plan and budgets and so on, where you need to have people in the room. And just to clarify, all of those meetings, all those visits are paid for by C40, so there is no cost to the London taxpayer.
So just to see, do you see the relation and how somebody at home now struggling with thinking, how on earth am I going to pay a ULEZ charge? We've got to say, I've been contacted by so many people, whether they're struggling carers, single parents, small business owners, and they're really thinking, how on earth am I going to charge this? And then they're looking at the Deputy Mayor for Environment, who's creating a lot more, who've created more emissions than they'll create in a year with their cars in those trips. And not feel any financial hardship from it. And at the other end, you've got these people across London now thinking, how on earth am I going to afford this? And they're creating a lot less emissions.
I think the question I would be asking is, if the Mayor can make £110 million available to Londoners, why isn't the government helping when they're helping other cities on this? Or what more could they do on helping me with my energy schemes instead of cutting the energy support package by next February? So all of those questions, I think that I think what you're confusing is some of the help that could be could be made available on carbon emissions. Some of the activity that I'm rightly doing to support London to make London net zero, to show London's leadership, to learn from other cities about what more we can bring back here. We've just talked about some of the learnings that we can bring in from other cities to help London go further
I'm
and
asking
faster.
if you see how it looks, because I speak to a lot of angry people, a lot of people that are really angry and really worried, and that's their concern. You mentioned there, obviously, that we know that London gets more funding per capita than anywhere in the UK. We know that we have the most generous transport scheme out of anywhere in the UK. So we do get a very hefty amount to help pay for schemes. But obviously, when it comes to this £110 million that the Mayor's suggested he'll be putting forward for the scrappage scheme, are you aware how many non-compliant vehicles that will allow you to scrap?
Not offhand. I think the 61 million scrappage scheme scrapped something in the order of 15,000, but it's a bit difficult to translate that, doubling it, because it will depend on the package is slightly different. Some people may decide to choose to take a higher package because they're going to take, for the first time we're offering bus and tram season tickets for people, mobility credits. There's a retrofit package there which is slightly less, which costs less than the full scrappage. So you can't translate that.
So you don't have an estimate on cars that will reach. And do you have a figure of how many non-compliant vehicles there are at the moment?
There are something like 15% of.
There's an actual figure. I know the percentage.
Not with me, no.
That's really concerning, though. That's not going to reassure anyone at home to have, you don't know how many this scrappage scheme will be able to help. And
I've just explained that you can't just do a translation because it depends who applies and what they apply for. So, but to give you a guide, a £61 million scrappage scheme that has closed helped over 15,000 vehicles. We have been lobbying government for several years now for a scrappage scheme that would really help all Londoners, to no avail. They're quite happy to, and we're very happy they support other cities. But when you talked about the very generous London transport scheme, a lot of that is being paid for by Londoners rather than by the government.
No, it's a government funding in towards London. It's more generous than anywhere in the UK. I'm talking
after the
specifically
fare
about
box, for example, the fare scheme.
No, I'm talking particularly about central government funding being the most generous, which I'm sure you know already. But the point being then, so that would be 50. So if you say for 61 million, it's about 15,000 cars. So we're talking about maybe 20,000 to 25,000 cars. So that's why it's really important to know the figure that you estimate of the amount of cars that do exist that are non-compliant.
Well, I'll just point out, as I've said, 85% of vehicles in Outer London, seen driving in the Outer London zone, are already compliant.
Yes,
we would
how
expect
many are non-compliant?
15%.
No, how many in terms of an actual figure?
I can't give that to you now.
Okay, so that's what would be really helpful for people to know. I'm asking, particularly in terms of environment, I think it's important for Shirley to know. I'll move on to, if I could, because you mentioned earlier when you were talking about the Silvertown Tunnel and ULEZ having an impact, so I'll segue into that quickly and ask. So when making that air quality assessment for the ULEZ, I think the chair touched on this, you use the 20 micrograms of nitrogen dioxide per cubic square metre, but for the Silvertown Tunnel chose to use 40. Do you think that you should perhaps revisit that and use the same measurement for both?
The Silvertown Tunnel decision has been made.
But we're still talking about the impact, and I think we can be honest with Londoners about the impact. The decision's been made, but I don't think that means that we don't have to be honest with people about what the reality of that decision is.
The reality of the decision, as I've said, is it's one project within one infrastructure project within assessed as part of the London emissions inventory. So when you look at it as a whole, London's emissions, with the combination of policies that Mayor is bringing in, the ultra-low emission zone, all of those things are reducing air pollution already. We've had independent evaluation showing that the combination of air policies would bring us into air pollution compliance with the legal limits that currently exist by 2025.
Can we talk specifically about Silvertown Tunnel? Because if you live in Newham, if you live on the edge of the tunnel, it doesn't matter to you what the results are in the round if you're breathing the air from the Silvertown Tunnel every day. That's what you're concerned about. So you would like to know what the impact is of that infrastructure on your well-being. So what I'm asking is, if we can use one measurement for the ULEZ, and we can keep that bar and raise that bar there, why would we not raise that bar for the Silvertown Tunnel and have the same measurement?
The air pollution that we have measured and that was modelled will show that we are in compliance with legal limits.
You've used two, just to spell it out again, you've used two different measurements, so why don't we use the same measurement for both?
And I'm explaining that the air pollution, the implementation of air pollution measures, like the ultra-low emission zone, like cleaning up the buses, like reducing road traffic through ultra-low emission zone measures, will help reduce air pollution generally,
but
which will help.
Sorry, that's not the question. I know the chair wants to get. So I'm just trying to. Why would you not use the same air measurement as for the ULEZ for the air quality assessment for the Silvertown Tunnel?
Because the air quality assessment has been completed. If you're talking about the ongoing monitoring, I've already explained that the air pollution monitoring that exists, whether it's the reference monitoring that the local authority has, or the diffusion tubes or the Breathe London monitors, they're all there that can give you that sort of guidance, and we can monitor that. That is monitoring already.
But in terms of the assessment of what's going to be...
Sorry, Assembly Member Best, I'm going to have to move us on just because we've got another panel. I'm going to apologise for guests. I did say to Assembly Member Cooper they could have a very quick moment.
Yeah, I did ask actually in the pre-meeting as well if I could ask a couple of things. Just to follow up really on something that Emma was asking about, Assembly Member Best was just asking about. Obviously, you're not the Deputy Mayor for Transport, but it would be very helpful for us as the Environment Committee if you could send us afterwards the number of the 15% equates to in Outer London those vehicles that are non-compliant. So if you were able to send that to us, I think that would be helpful. My question was actually about something different though, and kind of related back to one of the questions to do with flooding and water. And one of the changes that was made after 2016 when the Mayor first came in was to merge a couple of bodies, one relating to transport and one relating to environment. There's often these crossovers, which is we're talking transport and environment issues now, to set up a new Rivers Forum. I've not really heard very much of an output from the Rivers Forum or exactly what's going on. I think it was at one point chaired possibly by Val Shawcross. I wonder if we could have an update from you on what it's doing, because obviously use of the river for all sorts of things, whether that's floating rubbish down the river from the Western Riverside Waste Authority to go to the Belvedere incinerator, whether that's people using it for leisure, whether that's the clippers who actually invited a lot of us over for a cross-party briefing on their plans to move from diesel to biofuel to electric and so on and so forth. Could you give us an update on the work of the Rivers Forum? Because I've heard nothing about it really very much.
I believe that's a Transport for London-led body. As you said, Val Shawcross, I think, chaired it. So I'm very happy to follow up with Seb and find out, and Transport for London colleagues to and
I
send
think
you
that
an
would
update.
be really welcome, because it incorporated an awful lot of bodies that were full of environmentalists, and I do think one of the issues to do with the river is that we shouldn't just see it as something that relates to transport, because there's a number of environmental issues that are, matter a great deal. In fact, just at the last Assembly meeting, Assembly Member Best and Assembly Member Polanski were speaking to, and actually several of us spoke about, a motion on wet wipes, and the nature of the river is changing because of the wet wipes, and that is which are all building up and creating new banks and changing the way that the river flows and the state of the fish in it. These are not transport issues. So
no, they're not. But
if you could,
we can certainly update you on where the forum is and what they're doing. But in terms of what we're doing on pollution in the river, then yes, there has been a lot of work in the team on this, whether it's we've done a water runoff study. So, for example, pollution from the roads running into rivers. We're advocating to Thames Water and the other water companies about any overspills, pollution discharges into the river. And we've just seen the government talking about ring fencing fines so they can help with that. So some of the responses to the water companies' business plans, we talked about pollution as well. We've been working with the Port of London Authority on, how they can clean up the vessels on the river in terms of air pollution and also moving to electric. So lots of things there. We'll, talking about the embankments and the riverside, and of course resilience issues as well.
Maybe
How do we
that's
green them?
something again that, because I know that the chair wants us to move on, and obviously I know that your time is constrained, that perhaps your team could give the committee an update on all of the work on all the environmental aspects of the river that's being done, because I feel that we haven't really had much of a focus on that of late, and it's such an important matter to Londoners. We all orientate ourselves in the city by saying we're north or south of the river, so it would be really good to hear more about that. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, and that would be great if you could write to the committee with that, because I agree with Assembly Member Cooper. I think that'd be much interest. Apologies for overrunning, but thank you for the broad range of topics you've answered there. I make it 3:11, so I'm going to propose we all come back at 3:16, where we'll be joined by our second panel, and we'll be focusing our discussion on the transition for businesses. Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome back to the Environment Committee meeting, where we will now move to our second panel of guests. Welcome to you all. Dr. Ashok Sinha, who is Chair of London Sustainable Development Commission. Welcome. Hamid Tavassoli, Programme Lead of Greener Business, SELCE. Mark Jenkinson from the London Chamber of Commerce and Industry, welcome. And Julianne Calliette-Noble, who will be joining us on Zoom at 4 o'clock, who is the Managing Director of Sustainable Restaurant Association. We also welcome back the Deputy Mayor and Catherine Barber from our first panel. Thanks again for joining us. So if I can begin again with the Deputy Mayor, sorry you don't get a break. What is the status of the green transition at present in London's businesses overall, and are you content with progress so far?
Well, I guess it varies from if you take it as big business, the sort of corporate businesses headquartered here, large businesses, and the bulk of businesses in London are SMEs. There's a difference, partly because of capacity, and many of those business leaders, for example, will have got net zero plans, for example, or have been working very hard on improving the sustainability of their businesses, their operations, working with their staff, and listening to their customers. And not least because the Mayor has been asking them to do more. So we have our business climate leaders, for example, to do that. We have a number of business organisations that we've been working with, from Business London, formerly London First, to the FSB, through to the various numbers of bids that are across London. Many of those are part of the London Recovery Board and have signed up to the Green New Deal mission objective of doubling the size of London's green economy by 2030, through taking action on the climate and ecological emergency, tackling air pollution and so on. And we talked about this in the previous session about some of those things would be including retrofit, greening, tackling waste and moving to a circular economy. So there is always more that they can be doing, and we've talked about the 2030 target and how we need to ramp that up. However, for our smaller businesses, SMEs, it's more difficult, and not least because of COVID and lockdown and the sort of economic impacts of that. And now the energy crisis and the cost of living crisis is also, having an impact as well. But one of the big things is they're so dispersed. It's not easy to get to them. They're really focused in just making a living and making a daily living. So very hard, not because of willingness, but because of capacity, time, to think about anything. And, how do you make things easier for them to access advice, information, funding, and so on. So I would say they're probably on two different tracks, but both of them are completely recognised by the Mayor as needing to be tackled, and we've been putting in place a number of programmes, whether it's tackling and supporting SMEs to get advice on how you transition to a circular economy, through some of our programmes like Better Futures Plus, Advanced London, those sorts of programmes, through to some of the big, the programmes where we're helping on, for example, energy audits. So we're working with bids to help pilot in a number of small and medium enterprise businesses, how they might understand how they can save money and move to net zero at the same time, which will then hopefully create a model that we can replicate across London and hopefully across the UK.
Thank you. And Dr. Sinha, if I can bring you in here, how do you feel like the green transition is going, and are you content with progress so far?
Well, thank you so much, first of all, Chair, and to the committee for inviting me to represent the London Sustainable Development Commission here. Just in case some of you are unfamiliar with the Commission, we're an independent body. Everybody gives their time voluntarily, and our remit is to give advice, non-partisan advice, to the Mayor of the day, in this case, Sadiq Khan. I should also thank Leonie so very much for representing the Assembly on the Commission and being such a good channel between ourselves and the Assembly. Thank you, Leonie. So, I mean, the obvious answer to the question is it's not going as well as it needs to go. And the way in which we have to judge this in relation to the scale and speed of action that is commensurate, that is needed in relation to the climate and ecological emergencies. And we often talk about the green transition in net zero terms, and sometimes we also talk about the circular economy. But I think we should always keep in mind that there are a broader range of so-called planetary limits that are beyond those two items, whether it's nitrogen and phosphorus loading, whether it is ocean acidification, whether it's freshwater withdrawals, whether it's biodiversity. And we have an ecological footprint in London that is way beyond our borders, and it extends through the supply chains and the value chains that impact and all the business that is undertaken in London. And I think it's just worth remembering it's not just carbon. It's not even just nitrous oxide and PM 2.5s that we need to get a grip on. There's a whole range of things that relates to the way we live in London and the transformation that we need to make in our economy and the way we lead our lives. So when judged in relation to the scale of the challenge, no, we're not going fast enough. But I think there's a couple of things that I think are really, really positive that we can build on. We all in the Commission welcome the fact that the Mayor brought forward the net zero commitment in London from 2050 to 2030, recognising that, as you all know, a commitment to net zero 2050 still only gives us a 50-50 chance of staying within the 1.5 degrees C limit as set by the Paris Agreement, and we need to improve the odds. We also need to improve, front-load the effort to get to net zero if we're going to have a chance of doing the really hard stuff that is down the track. So that's a promising sign. I think it's also very promising that so many, and this relates to business, so many of the bigger businesses in London are aware of the role that they have to play to help achieve, and the local authorities, of course, net zero, whether it's through their decarbonisation plans, whether it's through ESG, whether it's through the fact that they are integrating the UN Sustainable Development Goals into their ways of doing business. So in many ways, the level of appreciation and understanding and commitment at a policy and, if you like, moral level to achieving net zero is there. But we are, of course, a long way away from the depth and speed of action that is needed to achieve net zero by 2030 and more broadly stay within planetary boundaries.
Thank you. That was so well articulated. I think so many important points there, particularly the point about front loading, which I think often gets missed because of feedback loops, etc. You want to do the hard stuff first. Hamid, if I can bring you in, what are the biggest challenges for businesses in terms of decarbonising and moving towards more sustainable modes of working?
Thank you for inviting me to the committee. As you know, I represent a Greener Business in Greenwich program, which is delivered by South East London Community Energy and sponsored by the Royal Borough of Greenwich. We have been delivering this program for a year now, and we have learned some key findings that I would be happy to share with the board, with the panel. Actually, as Deputy Mayor mentioned, one of the barriers for delivering these net zero ambitions to the business community is the outreach to smaller businesses who usually do not have the in-house capacity for sustainability expertise and delivering their programs. That's the first thing that we noticed, and our program was kind of trying to fill that gap. So we have been actually working with smaller businesses to give them the knowledge and expertise needed for knowing their environmental footprints and also giving them action plans to upgrade their environmental performance. Another barrier that we mentioned was accessing or financing implementation. I mean, we have been working with businesses to know their footprints and also propose some action plans for them to approach net zero. But the problem was that there were not financing channels available for implementation of the measures we have been recommending to them. In some areas, like in Essex or in Coventry or many other places around the country, there are some funding for this type. For financing the implementation of the measures, which we don't have them here in Greenwich that we have been covering. And that was the main thing that our efforts have been ending at a phase that the implementation was going to be started, and the businesses were looking for financing them. Of course, the energy price changes have changed a bit, this situation a bit, as it is now kind of a necessity for the businesses to go ahead with the measures we proposed, but still I believe that there is a gap over there. The other issue that we have faced in delivering our program was tenant-landlord relationships. Most of the small businesses are tenants in premises which are not owned by them, and implementing some energy reduction measures or other types of measures are usually difficult they are not possible for the tenants, and the landlords are not interested. So there must be some incentives for the landlords to cooperate with those type of measures. I know that GLA is already sponsoring some programs called Better Future Plus, for example, which is delivered by our partners, and we have been working with them to deliver that locally. But I believe community energy organizations like us can work with smaller businesses and kind of fill that gap and reach smaller businesses and bring them on board to approach net zero ambitions. Larger businesses or medium-sized businesses usually have some expertise or some sustainability teams who are doing that for them, but smaller businesses lack them, and I believe our approach, which was through community energy organization, was a good way for onboarding this type of small businesses.
Thank you, Hamid. That's really helpful. So to turn to you, Mark, I feel like Hamid's got the ball rolling there in terms of what are the big differences between SMEs and big business. Obviously, finance was coming through clearly there, but I was wondering if there's other specific challenges.
So can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So well, obviously I'm here representing the London Chamber again. Thank you for the invitation. So I lead the Chamber's Environment, Sustainability and Green Growth focus. I am a member of the Chamber, but lead a particular focus. I used to work for a company who used to be based here, which had 365,000 employees. Now I have my own little sustainability consultancy. I have one. So I am now a micro business. But the London Chamber is predominantly SMEs, and there are also predominantly micro businesses. But clearly, obviously, there are a number of large corporates, and our energy, Environment, Sustainability and Green Growth Committee is basically made up of a mix. So we have the likes of British Land, the City Airport, the University of East London, UPS. So we're trying to learn from them what they're doing. So they've all got their plans in place, and they've got either CSOs, Chief Sustainability Officers, or they've got a team. Whereas we've got smaller companies on the group where so what we're trying to do is trying to learn from the larger corporates what they're doing, a bit like the Business Climate Leaders Group, which Siemens used to be part of, and I was involved with that. Trying to kind of share that knowledge, collate case studies of stuff that's good stuff that they're doing, and also areas where they've struggled a bit, and try and get the SMEs, the micro businesses, get them to start. And I think I reiterate everything that's just been said before about the barriers, but obviously one of the issues is just where do we start? The Better Futures programme and the Climate Essentials carbon tool is great, and we're actually using that for the London Chamber itself to try and work out what the Chamber's own footprint is. So so trying to walk the talk, as was mentioned earlier. I think a common theme of today so far is it's not going fast enough, and a bit like Tony's being asked by people what's happening with flooding. Well, everyone asked me, so are we going to hit this wonderful 2030 target? And I must admit, sitting where I am today, I don't feel we have the confidence that we are moving fast enough. And obviously there are various reasons why we're not moving fast enough. But clearly, business is keen to get on with it. Clearly, there are other things for smaller businesses, energy, the price of energy and everything else. But I think you'll find that We had a number of surveys. I think almost 89% of businesses surveyed actually are aware of climate change, so that's great. But only 45% have actually started to do things. So within, and I'm here from the obviously London Chamber, obviously talked to the CBI and others. They did a similar survey, and I think something like with regards retrofit, 55% of businesses are actually already going through their portfolio retrofitting. But still, there's an issue around skills gaps, which again was something we've kind of highlighting, that we don't have enough people there to actually do the stuff, whether it's retrofit, whether it's heat pumps, it was mentioned earlier. And again, that's a big issue for businesses. Almost half of businesses surveyed within the London Chamber network said they were struggling to find the green skills in order to, whatever green job is, and obviously there's a list, but to trying to find the jobs. And I think also, I guess we need to work smartly. And I think from a chamber perspective, it's all about how does the GLA work and the Assembly work closer with the local councils, the local authorities, with all the various business groups. Now the LSIP, the London Skills Improvement Plan, I guess is a good example of where there is going to be some working together of the various business groups led by Business London, with the London Chamber, with FSB, with CBI, and also obviously with the GLA to try and push the skills agenda. So I think, back to your kind of question, I think obviously it's a bit easier for larger corporates, but the SMEs, the micro businesses, as has been said, are struggling, but we're trying to help as much as we can. But I think we need more help, and we need some more investment. So clearly, you had the whole thing about should London be getting the investment it needs? Well, the London APPG is a global city, which is supported by the London Chamber, which is chaired by Gareth Bacon. They found recently that we don't have enough funding in London, and obviously we need more. So that's been a big issue again throughout. It always comes back to we're trying to do things on a shoestring, and we're also lots of volunteers. I'm rambling a bit now, but yesterday we had the meeting of the Skills for Sustainable Skyline Task Force, which is being led by the City of London and on behalf of Central London boroughs. There were 150 people in the room, all from business and third sector organisations, all keen to ensure that we can close this skills gap, all doing it voluntary. And you can think, well, this is good, but we need a bit of finance and investment and a push behind all these various initiatives.
Thanks, Mark. That's a really helpful introduction. And so finally, Catherine, just before I hand over to my colleagues, when we had our informal roundtable last week, much of what Mark is saying was echoed there. People saying in particular they didn't know who the high authority was, and I don't mean in some sort of esoteric way, but in terms of they didn't know who to go to or where to go to get help. How do you feel the transition's going? I almost want to say, is it going fast enough? But it's a ridiculous question because it clearly isn't. But I will ask a ridiculous question and go, is it going fast enough, Catherine?
It always needs to go faster. I think, just to pick up on some of the points that colleagues here have made, if I think in particular about small businesses and what motivates them, they've got so much going on, so much to cope with, not a lot of people to do a lot of work. I think clarity about the direction of travel, which way is the economy going, and that's both in terms of the policy that shapes the economy and then also in terms of customer demand. I think the Mayor is being really clear about which way London's economy is going. He says it as kind of crystal clear about his desire to get to net zero by 2030, but that you have to say it again and again for people to be able to hear that when they're busy. I think the second area is about skills and carbon literacy and knowing what retrofit even means before you then try to do it. It's something which the adult education budget, which is devolved from central government to the Mayor to spend in London, has focused quite a lot on. So in 2021, £32 million of that budget was spent either directly on green skills projects like how to install heat pumps or EV charging points, or in sectors which have sort of green elements, whether that's construction, transport, engineering, etc. So that is one way that we support businesses with one of those potential constraints. There's obviously funding as well. Shirley mentioned some of the projects that we've supported through Green New Deal funding. But the scale at which the GLA can spend is, we work in sort of pilot realm. We try to learn lessons and then expand those or share case studies, which can then be disseminated and hopefully inspire others. But we'd really like to see central government helping in this area as well. I note that there have been, I think, several manifestos in a row for governments promising a small business energy efficiency scheme, which hasn't yet materialised, and I think that would be really helpful. And then finally, I think regulation moves businesses. One prefers the carrot to the stick, but if you think about how health and safety is now just something that all businesses think about, even if they're small businesses, climate change and the environmental crisis is really a health issue as well, and a safety issue. So that's something we should consider too.
Thank you. Assembly Member Bukhari.
Thank you. I do want to talk a little bit more about retrofitting. And it was something that was brought up continually during the adult education budget plenary meeting and economy meeting that we've had. And I know that it's a goal for the mayor in particular to see an increase, but only 8.8% of the money made available in round 2 of funding through Skills for London's Capital Fund was earmarked for the mayor's construction academy. And the deputy mayor for Skills, Jules Pipe, was often explaining his reasoning based on the fact that there wasn't enough evidence or enough pull for him to invest more in this particular area. Now, I was wondering whether you're working with the Deputy Mayor of Skills to encourage him to start funding more in this particular area, because we've just heard from Mark and many other groups that are saying that there is just not enough being invested in retrofitting. We've really got to do better here.
To me, yeah. Yeah, so I work very, very closely with Jules, and the team does too, with our regeneration and skills team. I think probably what Jules is trying to say is the pull has to come from businesses, but the developers who are saying they want, to install retrofit measures, and so they want to employ apprentices or new people who are employed in these skills. And until we have that certainty, so certainly in London, we've been sending the signal that we want to retrofit London, but our programme is £43 million. So that is not enough for a company to invest in skills and paying people and apprentices or whatever. So what we need is that national energy efficiency retrofit package signal, and that certainty of funding that is longer than a year, so that they know that they can invest in training somebody, or we can provide, as Jules has done, not just the construction academy, but we've got a green skills academy which is looking at other green skills from electric vehicle infrastructure and other renewable energy as well. We put more money into this and are training more. We're doing some work on solar skills as well. So there's certainly the through the Green New Deal, we absolutely recognise this, and this is a ramping up thing. But again, what happened before on the Green Deal, I don't know if you remember, was lots of people went and trained to be assessors and retrofitters, and then the money was pulled and they had no jobs and no money to go to. So we can't afford to make the same mistake again. So we need that certainty. But in the meantime, we're putting in place the pipeline. So the chair talked about coming to the schools kickstart. The focus this year was very much on encouraging young people to understand what a green job is, what the potential is, and how they could play a part in that. So we worked with our green skills hubs, our education teams, and we had over, I can't remember how many thousands it was in I think it was the EXL, where they were coming along to understand what these potential jobs might be and what the pathways there were there. So these are all collectively the work that we're doing within the GLA, but not just the GLA, but also working with London councils very closely. Today, we've been working with London boroughs and London councils on their retrofit action plan. Part of that delivery programme is about how do we ramp up green skills, but in a way that is sustainable, as in long-lasting and isn't stop-start.
I mean, it's good to hear that you're definitely on plan to focus more on the retrofitting, and it'll be good to see the Deputy Mayor for Skills also kind of backing you up on that as well, I think, further. I did want to also talk a little bit about the roundtable that happened last week about where I unfortunately didn't make it, but there was some businesses there that were talking about the way they're moving towards net zero. Has actually combined ideas such as cargo bikes, which is I've been doing some work on the economy committee. Dabo Drop, I hope I've said that right, are a zero waste takeaway. And they've actually highlighted the benefits of the cargo bikes, particularly for their business. I want to know whether, in your role as Deputy Mayor, how are you working with the Cycling Commissioner, who's doing a cargo bike strategy, to make sure that this is a way forward for small businesses in particular? I mean, he's obviously going to be working about infrastructure, but what are you doing in terms of your impact and making sure that small businesses do achieve those goals?
Yeah, very, very closely with Will, the Walking and Cycling Commissioner, on, his area essentially is essentially part of the Mayor's transport strategy. We want to move 80% of trips in London to walking and cycling, and that includes business trips as well. Leaving the space on our roads freed up for those essential services that need to be in a vehicle, and preferably a cleaner vehicle, an electric vehicle. So cargo bikes, absolutely, very supportive of his strategy. The scrappage scheme that the Mayor has introduced for the ultra-low emission zone, if businesses want to scrap their vehicles and use that funding to buy a cargo bike, that's absolutely an option. So some of the work that we've done through the Mayor's Air Quality Fund has been helping to support businesses, in some of the sort of zero emission zones in Walth Forest, Hackney and other places to think about alternative options, and part of that has been helping them with cargo bikes, and you're seeing many, many more of them on the road.
Yeah. Great to get that clarification about the scrappage scheme, including cargo bikes. That's fantastic. Hamid and Mark, you were touching on energy costs earlier as well. This must, impact the way the businesses are approaching how they're going to be changing the way they work and sustainably and investing in greener options. Has this prompted efforts to curb energy usage, and are they seeking alternatives? Have you got any examples that you can give us? Do you want to go first, Mark, and then Hamid?
Yeah, can do. Yeah, so, well, I guess for most businesses, costs have gone up probably almost kind of tenfold for some of the energy costs, which I guess you could argue would then be a good move to start to think about retrofitting. I guess the issue is that you're still thinking about, will I be still in business in a year's time? So if I replace my lighting with LED lighting, payback maybe 2 years, but will I still be around? So I guess that's kind of one of the things that we need to look at. I guess there's still this question about, are people working from home? How often are they coming back into the office? So again, is that still a kind of a topic where you think, well, maybe you can kind of reduce the usage within the office? Part of one of the things I'm doing in my own business is we do energy audits, and I have found a number of offices where they may be vacant, and because their buildings are quite old buildings, 1970s buildings, limited technology, they'll have the heating on 23 degree set point, 24/7. And 3 of the 5 floors may be vacant. So again, there's I think part of it also is trying to understand how your building works. Obviously, we're in a super sustainable building here, and which I'm sure you're all enjoying. But again, it's all about then this drive to technology, which is a little bit slow. I also involved with the Techland Advocates Prop Tech group, so trying to kind of drive the technology adoption. But again, that's a little bit slow because, again, it's a case of will we be around in a year's time? So I don't know if that answers your question, but it's difficult.
As he mentioned, I think that has been a trigger point for businesses to think more about their energy usage and carbon emissions. But as I mentioned earlier, there are still barriers for them in 2 ways. One is that they are not sure about the paybacks because, as you mentioned, I mean, either they are not in those premises for long, I mean, they are tenants at the premises, or they are not finding it easy to finance it themselves, and they are expecting to receive some type of fundings from the government or from the local authorities. These are two things that are just lagging their actions, although I mean, they have received that trigger point based on the soaring energy prices. When we started the program last year, energy prices were at least 1/5 to 1/6 of today prices, and this has been I mean, big uncertainty. This has brought forward a big uncertainty for businesses. They are still not sure if these are going to be the case in for next year or so. So that's why there have been some kind of, I would say, I mean, not being clear about the future, and I believe that there must be some kind of support by the local authorities and the government for businesses to push forward based on these trigger points. Yeah.
You still think there needs to be some advice for businesses to just even find out about the alternatives? Is that
yeah,
the issue?
I mean, the knowledge is there. As I said, we have already, for example, in case of our program, we have already given them the knowledge needed, and we have, I mean, given them the audits or the action plans needed. The point is that they are not sure how to start implementing those actions. And as I said, one is financing issue. The other one is I mean, unlike houses, you cannot expect to have a long-term plan for your business premises in terms of retrofitting. So there must be some. I believe. I mean, landlords are more important in this way rather than the tenants, the business tenants.
Thank you, Hamid and Mark. What are examples of good sustainable practice already taking place in London's hospitality sector, and what can we learn from these particular groups? Have you got any examples at all from that area?
Yeah, I go first. Well, we have been working with some, I mean, with businesses from many diverse set of sectors, including hospitality. For hospitality sector, I mean, we can look at the accommodation section and also the restaurants and coffee shops. So I believe that energy is, if we talk about their carbon footprints, energy is not a big part of their carbon footprints. I mean, if we talk about the food sector, kind of their supply chain is more important. I would say 80% of their carbon footprint is usually from their supply chains rather than their own operations. Although it's very important to bring down their energy consumptions and costs and, of course, the emissions caused by energy usage, but the supply chain is very important, and businesses, I mean, food businesses, actually, hospitality businesses, must be encouraged to remap their supply chains if they want to really bring their carbon emissions. It's not just the supply chain, but also the food miles, for example. I noticed that it was also mentioned in the papers here, is quite important for those set of businesses. So, yeah, I mean, to summarize, I believe energy is important here, but that supply chain must be really looked more truly for this sector.
Thank you. Mark, do you have any examples from the hospitality sector?
Not really a good practice, more kind of that there are a number of businesses which are just struggling. You know, not far from Greenwich in Blackheath, we have a number of businesses who are they're worried they're going to have to close their doors because they can't put the prices up on the. Well, obviously the issue is they can't put the menu prices up because then obviously people won't come because they have enough money to spend. So
picking up a lot. There's just basically a lot of challenges that you know. And
the April uncertainty as well as when it all stops.
I forgot to give you an example. I mean, in our case in Greenwich, I think Greenwich Cooperative development agency, GCDA, is doing a very good job in the food sector. They are working with restaurants to lower their food waste. And by lowering food waste, I think part of that carbon footprint is decreased in a good level. So that's part of the supply chain I was mentioning. Yeah.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Did I see you wanted to come in there?
Yeah, it was just to flag. Absolutely agree with Hamid that this is absolutely what we want people to be doing. But in a situation where people have to prioritise what they're able to do, partly because of capacity or partly just to survive, then obviously we would encourage people to look at the things they can do, like starting with energy, the operational emissions that they have direct control for. Ideally, we want to look down the supply chain and look at food miles and so on. And for those bigger businesses who have the capacity and the ability to do that, we want them to be doing that. We should be demanding that they do that. For SMEs, I think do what you can, but start with looking at your buildings and your operations. And we have a lot of advice on our business hub where, for example, for hospitality businesses, if you look on the London and Partners website, they've got frameworks and toolkits that take you through what you can do very simply, from energy to looking at your building control systems. We've got an audit checklist that building managers can use that can reduce energy. Often, people don't even realise that they have thermostats and things in the bowels of their basements that they can be fiddling around with and would save them energy. And then as they feel more confident or they have more time or capacity, then absolutely go to those other things. So I'd encourage people to have a look at the Business Hub, look at London Partners websites. They've got a number of frameworks, including one for hospitality. We've talked about some of our advice that we provide through, Re-London or Advanced London accelerators and so on. So.
Thank you. I'm going to come to Assembly Member Cooper in a moment. Assembly Member Devonshire, I think, had a brief supplementary. This is just to all Assembly members. It's 4 o'clock, so just to encourage us to move on. Indeed. Assembly Member Devonish.
I'll be very brief, Chair. I just wanted to ask the Deputy Mayor. I agree with what the points that Mark and others made, that clearly businesses can't invest long term when they don't know if they're going to be here, but the public sector can. So does she have an example of a GLA family building where we have put in best practice in terms of retrofit? And can we get back to some simple messages in terms of insulation, lighting, boiler refurbishment? Because I think the trouble with the whole green agenda is, I've spent much of my career in utilities and energy, and it's so complicated for the average person. And small businesses trying to actually run a small business, they haven't got time to be experts in environmental management. So have we got a building where we've actually done the job properly that we can actually use in our publicity to encourage SMEs to do so?
Sorry, your mic's not on.
Sorry, we do, but I'm not sure it would resonate with SMEs because obviously the buildings that we're in are very different to the buildings they occupy, and as Hamid talked about, the landlord-tenant issue. But this very building is the greenest retrofit building, City Hall, I believe, in the world, probably. So this one has had a lot of measures, and we can provide details to you afterwards about what has happened here. We've been working with a number of organisations where we're retrofitting, for example, the NHS. I'm going to Imperial College and their new Centre for Climate Change Innovation, which is a listed building, I believe, and that's being retrofitted. So lots of examples of what is possible. For SMEs, I think there are some buildings where they're housed and located again with landlords often taking the lead because of that who pays the rent and how much of a premium and how much of a benefit you get out of that as well.
Thank you. Assembly Member Cooper.
Thank you. And this is my second and my last question. So some people have, Chair, been speaking quite a lot today. Some of us haven't. I'd like to ask about some international comparators, and I'd actually like to come to Mark Jenkinson. And it must be strange for you being back here without the rainforest, the lovely rainforest that we used to have outside that's now been turned into the area known as the London Living Room, but of course it doesn't have any walls. But of course Siemens, who used to be based here, used to do international analysis of cities and companies. And going from that angle, rather than, I know you're here representing LCCI, but one of the reasons why you're on that subgroup is because of your particular expertise, both with large companies and analysis. as well as running your own micro business now. And I just wondered if you could tell us a little bit about whether there are any international cities where there's a successful green transition that's starting. Is there anywhere that we can learn from elsewhere around the globe? And I'll then come on to some others after you, but it'd be great to hear about that.
You're stretching the brain cells now. But, yeah, well, I was... possibly not where you're coming from, but I was at a Centre for London event last night, which was talking about last mile logistics, and was looking at how we're looking at consolidation points. And I guess one of the points was made was that London is probably lagging behind in respect to last mile, whether it's your smart lock or your lockers on the street, or whether it's actually going to the local post office for a pick up and drop off. And where it is working well is your Nordic countries, as usual, which obviously they're doing quite well, obviously, from a building perspective. My other half is actually Swedish, so obviously used to living in a very leaky house. So obviously, the usual things in the Nordics, the Belgium, Germany, albeit obviously they had a bit of an issue with focusing on the not nuclear and using a bit of lignite and coal. But I guess, I think the C40 cities, you're probably best start this I've been out of the game a little bit, but...
Well, my next stop was going to be, obviously, the Deputy Mayor, Shirley Rodrigues, because obviously you have had the chance with your previous roles in relation to C40 cities and some global responsibilities. Is there anywhere around the world? I mean, obviously, we've talked in this committee about Milan, and they're leading on things like, they're in a much better place than us around recycling. Yeah. But where else should we be looking to for, the things that we need to be doing around water, biodiversity, recycling? Are there any places doing well on the green transition?
All at different paces and all at different levels, because each city, each country has a different set of powers and responsibilities and ownership. Some people own water companies, so they're able to take more action quicker. We have more control over our transport agency. Others look to us with envy and wish they could. So we look to New York on buildings. They have many more powers on able to deal with sort of energy efficiency and mandating, for example, action on gas boilers, for example, which we're not able to do. So what we can do is try and do this through voluntary programs like retrofit, whereas they look at what we're doing on the ultra low emission zone and the congestion charge scheme. They now have got permission, I think, by their regional government to move ahead on congestion charging. So that is moving. If you look at carbon budgeting, for example, Oslo has done a lot of work, and because of their work through the C40, we've been working with them to understand how they've taken that forward, which has then prompted Sadiq to ask us to do that work. And the first carbon budgets for London for the functional bodies and the GLA have been published, and we want to improve on those and roll those out across, talk to boroughs and others about doing the same. If you look at water efficiency, if you look at Cape Town, they've had a dramatic reduction in water consumption. So the water efficiency measures are off the scale, but that was because they had a massive drought. And we really don't want to be in that position, which is why we keep pushing Thames Water to do more. But the sort of measures that they've taken in terms of behaviour change and planning and things like that, are lessons that we're able to bring back. And I know that our water companies have been talking to them and others as well. So just a few examples. If you look at transportation, we know that in South and Latin America, the fastest way to move lots of people is through bus rapid transit, so in electric buses, rather than spending years trying to build new metro systems, or you can do that in parallel to doing that. So lots of different approaches, and everybody learning from each other about, well, how did you do that? How can we collectively look at the financing? We're talking about financing for SMEs, but similarly, I know you've been talking to Catherine and others about the work that we're doing here on green financing, mobilising that private finance, trillions that have been identified at COP27 just for decarbonisation, and probably the same, if not bigger, for adaptation as well.
Thanks very much. Can I bring in Ashok as well on this one and just see, is there anywhere, either in the UK or globally, where we should be looking, where we can see the, successful green transition going on?
I think Shirley has covered it really well, covered the obvious examples that I would have looked towards. I would say also that there's a lot of room for innovation, however, because however well different cities, different countries, different regions are performing, one of the things that we're all very aware of is that we're going to have a whole load of new products and services and ways of doing things if we're going to rise to this challenge. And I'd just I'd like to underscore what I think, Shirley, you were saying a moment ago, or perhaps it was you, Catherine, about, for example, clean tech in London. Now, historically, we have fallen behind in terms of the rate of development of our clean tech centre, and this new Centre for Clean Tech Innovation is there to try and address it. So, yes, I think there's a lot that we can and should be learning, but there is a massive opportunity for us to innovate in London. We have this this great suite of assets, world-class universities, world-class business institutions, world-class capital, cultural capital, fantastic diversity. And actually, the opportunity from my perspective is for London to carve out a truly global leadership role here and set the bar high for many others to follow. So everything that Shirley said, but let's not lose sight of the chance before us to be a real global leader in innovation.
Thanks very much. Sorry.
Just going to add that I would say that we need to do more, but we're not that bad. And I think just to highlight, this is something that Rajesh, the Deputy Mayor for Business and Economy, has really got in his sights. We are doing quite well on clean tech. I think the winner of the Earthshot Award, Nopla, was just announced on Sunday. It was is based in London, came out of Imperial, one of our world-class universities. I think one of some of their staff were previous mayors, entrepreneur finalists. So absolutely echo that point about our universities' innovation. We want our Green Finance Centre to be the finance hub of the world for green finance, the Corporation, City of London. So absolutely echo that.
Thanks very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I just want to welcome Julianne to the call, who is Managing Director of Sustainable Restaurant Association. Julianne will be with you shortly. We have two sections just before you, but welcome. Just for my fellow Assembly members, indeed, we're just swapping the next two sections round, so we're moving to a just transition. I'm going to hand over to Assembly Member McCartney.
Thank you, and perhaps I can start with Dr. Sinha, if I can. What do we mean by a just transition in respect of London's contacts, and what are the key concerns and potential injustices that could arise?
That's the $64,000 question, isn't it? That's really at the heart of everything. And I should have said at the top that, as some of you know, my day job is as CEO of the London Cycling Campaign, but I'm purely talking from the perspective of the London Sustainable Development Commission today. So, I go back to this, if you like, the classic definition of sustainable development to begin with, which is, and you can articulate it in so many different ways, but one way of articulating it is to try and develop a healthy economy that operates within the planetary boundaries, the life-carrying capacity of the planet, but at the same time maximizes the uplift in prosperity and well-being and equity for everyone. So looking at all of those co-benefits and those opportunities to have a suite of policies whose end results are greater than the sum of their individual parts. Now, fantastic. I'm sure we'll all agree with that. It's motherhood and apple pie by now for all of us, I would have thought. But it is the speed which is and the scale of the transformation that is so arresting. And there are going to be so many difficult choices that will have to be made. We talked earlier, the panel talked earlier, Assembly members talked earlier about ULEZ, for example. The difficult choices will need to be made. And we don't always know who the winners and the losers are going to be in respect of all of those choices. We don't want anybody to be a loser. We need to find a way of ensuring that people are able to not be left behind. So we have to have a whole society transition. And how do we know what that looks like? Do we know where the most negative impacts will be that we'll need to ameliorate? A little example, that's one that's used quite a lot. We have lots of small garages in London. Right? Now, if we are successful in achieving the mode shift that we're looking for, 27% reduction in motor vehicle kilometres moved by 2030, if we are also successful in switching away from fossil fuel-based vehicles and in people then using electric vehicles, which are more reliable, which have less moving parts, which are more modular in their construction, there's a whole bunch of people in arches around London who may find that they don't have a job in 10 years' time. So do we even know what the scale of that problem is? And that's just one example. So before we can even think about helping people make that transition to a different way, different set of skills, different entrepreneurial opportunities, accessing the capital to be entrepreneurial, we have to have a better understanding of the range of impacts that will occur from this transition in London. And I think that I actually think that some of the things that have come out of the work that we've started on the just transition as an LSDC, which started with a workshop earlier in this year, and it's work in progress, so I can't give you definitive, if you like, conclusions, is it doesn't feel like everybody fully grasps the scale of the challenge. Some of the metrics that we're familiar with, 27% reduction in vehicle kilometres, 2.2 million, heat pumps needing to be installed by 2030, 200,000 retrofits needed per annum. Those are eye-watering figures, and I don't think the gravity of the situation and the complexity and scale of what we're embarking upon is fully understood. And segueing on from that, in the conversation that we had early in the year, and this came through from some of the small and medium-sized enterprises, as it were, that were part of the conversation, and I've also had conversations with some outside of the LSDC as well, is that we are, in a sense, lacking that sense of collective mission as London. It's not right at the top of our political agenda. It is at the top of the mayor's agenda, of course, but when we talk about the political discourse that is occurring in London, it is not right at the top of the political discourse that we're having. And given that this is the most important challenge that all of us faces, that's important, yes, but it's all for its own sake, but it's also important because if you're an SME, you want to feel that you're part of something bigger. And everybody is pulling in the same direction, and that there is policy certainty that you will get the support in the future, and that everybody can relate to each other and support each other. There's a sense of collective mission and momentum, and that did come through. Nobody wants to feel isolated. Nobody wants to be feeling, okay, I've got something, this burden on my shoulders that I have to bear. No, we're all doing this together. I mean, a collective effort, it impels that effort for everybody. And the second, two other really important things came through, and these do relate to justice. One is to be really, really honest. When I said earlier we don't know who are going to be the winners and losers, for us, for you as decision makers, to be really honest with the public, saying there will be some difficult decisions. There will be some winners and losers. We don't have all the answers yet. We are working through all this to try and make sure we have the process in place to help you. There will be benefits in all sorts of ways to this transition. So if you look at just transportation, if you talk about things like ULEZ and road charging, it's more than just saying, okay, well, there's going to be some road charging, but we'll improve public transport. No, they were more than that. When we look at the work that we have done with young people previously, top of young people's agenda that we found was knife crime and mental health and physical well-being. So what can we do as part of this compact between governance in London and the citizenry to say, we're going on this journey, there are difficult decisions, but there will be mechanisms in place to improve your quality of life and address the things that really matter to you, and you are being listened to. And that compact then is based on solid ground, and people feel able to buy into that transformation, which will be quite eye-watering in scale. And the final point is, and this is kind of, if we don't get this right, then all considerations about a transition, let alone a just transition, become essentially academic, which is the funding. It's how we're going to pay for all of this and how we're going to make sure that funding is deployed. If we don't get that right, we're not going to make the transition. And you all know the numbers. Within the accelerated green pathway in the Net Zero 2030 plan and also out to 2050, the total cost is something like £300 billion. I mean, it's a part of that. 75 for London up to 2030. Yeah, that's right. So working back from that, 75 billion for London out to 2030. And that's a huge amount of money, most of which is going to come from the private sector. How are we going to move it? Now, as the LSTC, we put forward some recommendations and proposals as how we try and aggregate. London can aggregate, de-risk, create a pipeline of small projects that become investable opportunities for the big ticket investors in London. And the Mayor has put that into his manifesto, a commitment to work on the basis of creating a new financing facility. We expect the Mayor to make his recommendations next year. If we don't get that right and see those flows, then whether it's a small SME, whoever, we don't make the transition, or we don't make it as quickly and effectively as possible, and discussing whether it's fair or not becomes a moot point.
Thank you for that. It was a very full answer. With regards to not understanding the scale of the challenge, I think here at City Hall the Mayor certainly does. Do you get the sense that government or local government get the scale of the challenge? And if not, what's stopping them? Is it that they don't want to find the finance, or is it because the decisions are just too hard in a political context?
I think that, well, it's a complex set of... I would say the answer to that is complex. I would... On the one hand, it's very easy for me to sit here and say, well, people are not acting as if they understand the scale of the challenge. And that would be very unfair, because we've had 12 years of contraction in budgets for local authorities, and real terms contraction for public services, although there's been an increase in money going through to public services recently. We've got a cost of living crisis, we've got COVID. I don't expect people in local authorities, for example, coming into work every morning to say to themselves first thing, what's top of my list now when it comes to the transition to a sustainable economy. So it would be wrong for me to criticise people on that basis. They have an enormous amount on their plates and such pressing day-to-day challenges and difficulties, human challenges and difficulties to deal with. Having said all of that, I think we do need to do even more. Some local authorities have had commissions on the climate emergency. Westminster Council has got a commission on the future of Westminster or something like that. When I talk to officers and councillors, I am really pleased that people do want to get behind this necessary agenda.
I should say we have got a specific question on local in a minute.
I'm sorry.
No, it's my fault for raising it to start with.
No.
So I apologise. Yes, but national government as well.
National government. If you were to read what national government says, if you were to listen to what the Prime Minister said at COP27, then and take it entirely at face value, which I do, then they believe and they understand that this is the most important game in town, ultimately. We are still stuck with a policy suite and toolkit at the national level that is not up to the challenge. And at the moment, I don't see whether it's, the Environment Bill, the upcoming Transport Bill, whatever the legislation or set of regulations, I don't see as yet, and the Committee on Climate, a lot of this is based on what the Committee on Climate Change itself says. I don't see that clearly articulated pathway with an analysis of the impacts of different policy options, with a description of how all of those different policy options will fit together to deliver the totality of result that is needed. I don't see that yet, and it keeps slipping away. So I think, the jury is ultimately out as to whether it is at a really deep, almost visceral level, it is understood at national government that we can't kick this can down the road anymore.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. Can I bring in other panellists now? Perhaps I'll start with Mark. I think it was quite clear from that actually people, on the whole, want to do the right thing. But as far as businesses are concerned, there's obviously concern that if they invest in something, they might be putting themselves at a disadvantage. So that shared endeavour, I think, is going to be really important. So can I ask, from a business perspective, what does a just transition look like to you?
Before you ask the last bit, I was going to say things like procurement policies are also obviously key, and you've got two businesses going for the same contract. One has a kind of a more sustainable approach, but it may cost a little bit more. Unfortunately, based on the current procurement processes, even though some are kind of leaning more towards, maybe 10% of the weighting will be on the green focus, they're still losing out on business. So that was one point. But I guess what is just transition? And I guess there's a whole topic around diversity and inclusion. One area which we focused on within the London Chamber is a focus on black businesses, and we've created a Black Business Association in order to, because if you're a small black business looking for funding, I've forgotten the exact figures now, but I think you're 10 times less likely to get the finance, plus your maximum you'll get on average is 25 million versus, so in order to try and help make sure that, everyone within London gets a piece of the pie, the London Chamber is trying to help in certain areas. One of the skills gaps we highlighted, again, within this Sustainable Skills, Sustainable Skyline Task Force, is again not enough women and people from ethnic minorities involved in getting into the construction sector, in whichever part it may be. And you talk about, well, we need 40,000 people to retrofit all these homes and deliver these heat pumps that we're not delivering, because when we're at the bottom of the scale, again, Norway's kind of apparently almost reached 100%. So again, there's lots of jobs that we can create, lots of opportunity we can create, and therefore give people good, high-paid, skilled jobs, which is obviously what the government are saying they want. But obviously we need to have the clarity of what, are we definitely going to go for 2030? Are we definitely going to roll out heat pumps, the 2.2 million heat pumps across London? Are we definitely going to retrofit the 2.2 million homes, use your figures or whatever it is? But there are the opportunities, there are the skills gaps, and taking your positivity, we should be able to get this all by all working together. We should be able to ensure that we can actually meet the net zero 2030 target. We can also ensure that as many people as possible in London benefit. But I guess the thing is, the cost. If we don't do it, then there'll be more floods in Kensington. There'll be more. There will be hotter summers. More people will be dying because obviously our homes are still poorly insulated and also not fit for obviously degrees of 40 degrees. So I think we have to. Obviously the work you're doing is key, and but obviously we need to get businesses, local authorities, universities all working together, And
we've heard about some of the costs that might be needed to move to a net zero. And we've heard about some of the necessary mitigations that we need to be alive to. Do you think information about all of those is actually well understood by the public or by the business sector that you work with?
No, and I think also there is a cost of doing it, but there's also a cost of not doing it. Yeah. And obviously, the longer we wait, the higher the cost will be. And I think something like the insurance costs is like something like $5 billion a year just for flood risk, etc. So, but yeah, there's definitely a huge need for a communication campaign. There's obviously the climate hub and Bayes has this SME climate hub. By the way, they have 2 people now left in their team to help SMEs. So, is the government taking it seriously? Well, they could provide more help centrally. But yeah, it's. I think people are aware, but we always need to communicate, don't you? You need to communicate 3 or 4 times and then do it more.
Yeah. And I was struck by Ashok's comment that actually people need to be in a joint endeavour and to understand why they're doing something so they can feel part of something. So I think being able to design something with people is going to be important rather than people being seen it's being done to them, though ultimately that might have to take place. But I was going to come to Hamid if I can, but with the businesses you work with, is there that sense that they do understand or they don't understand? And did you in Greenwich get better buy-in when people thought they were actually part of a process?
Yeah, I believe business owners have some general knowledge about the necessity for going forward with net zero plans, and they are all aware of that. And then they also, I think, increasingly feel that with business cases rather than just some moral obligations. So that's quite obvious that, I mean, they have the general knowledge, but smaller businesses usually do not have access to the luxury of sustainability experts or sustainability teams within their businesses. And I believe that's how it is related to a just transition, because larger companies, corporates usually have all these knowledge and expertise, but smaller businesses do not have that, and then they will be kind of left behind in the transition, and that's not just. So I believe in planning just transitions that must be very well noticed. I mean, that smaller businesses get some kind of support from the government and local authority in terms of transitioning to a greener business, a greener future.
Thank you, Chair. And I think the impact of a just transition on the hospitality sector could perhaps be picked up with Julianne in the next section.
Makes sense. Assemblymember Clark.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you all for your comments so far. Ashok, thank you very much for outlining so clearly the very difficult decisions that we need to make and the very difficult conversations we need to have with the public. Before I move on to my question, just to say that, you know, I'm also a councillor in Barnet, and I represent Barnet and Camden, and I think every day with the very different outcomes for the boroughs as decisions have been made for the last decade or so. And Barnet most recently just declared a climate emergency, so it wasn't urgent before. And now with the expansion of ULEZ, which is going to bring cleaner air to Barnet, and in fact, you know, we're the second highest in terms of number of deaths by premature deaths because of toxic air. And we have 3 Conservative MPs who write to me and put out social media ads saying, you know, just saying it's just a tax on suburban drivers, and, you know, just basically not having that open and honest conversation that we all need to be having. So I feel that, you know, government is directly undermining some very important steps that we're taking as London that's going to deliver clean air into outer London, and it's really important to get there. And that is a perfect example of the very difficult, honest conversations we need to be having. But just getting back to you, Hamid, you asked, you were saying about support that councils could give to businesses. I'm just wondering if there are some examples of that, or how you feel there could be some further support.
Yeah, first thing is providing the knowledge as an awareness that I mentioned, and it can be delivered through programs like what we have been delivering with a sponsorship of the council. So that's one of them. And then the other one is finding ways to finance actions needed to transit towards a greener future. And I think that's not still happening, at least in Greenwich, that I have been working with. We have been having discussions with the council to find ways, for that, but up to the moment we have not found easy financing methods for small businesses. They are not looking for grants. They are looking for some rolling funds which can be coming from carbon offsets, for example, so that they can invest and then get the payback in a number of years. So so they're looking for kind of loans rather than just grants. But that's the main thing which is needed, apart from the knowledge which is already, I think, delivered in a number of ways. As I mentioned, our program was one. Then the Better Future Plus, which was also funded by the GLA, is another project or program to deliver that awareness to smaller businesses, which has been, I believe it has been successful. Yeah.
When we were at that roundtable that several members have referred to, one of the things that was highlighted was the cargo bike scheme in Waltham Forest. That sounded like a really good and local initiative. Are there any other such ones that you're aware of?
I mean, if I want to look specifically on some kind of programs like what you mentioned, I don't have anything in mind at the moment. Okay. I believe one thing that we delivered in Greenwich was use of community shares in funding solar panel installations on public buildings. This can be done on business buildings as well. So that program can be a good approach towards providing clean energy for businesses, and using community share, which is a good way towards that. It has been already experienced within public buildings and schools, as I mentioned, and in 2 businesses, as far as I know. I mean, we have installed solar panels on top of Intercontinental Hotel O2, based on, funded by community shares, and it has been working very well, and the energy was used by the hotel, but was financed not by the hotel, but by the community.
Thank you. I should have declared an interest, but it wasn't quite on the agenda earlier, Chair. I am a shareholder in solar panels on the secondary school where my children attended. Ashok, just coming back to you on what sort of more support the GLA or councils could give on the just transition.
There's, I'm sure there's a range of things, but I'll just pick one thorny issue which I find particularly difficult to try and understand my way through, and I think a lot of people do. And it relates to a comment you made a moment ago about, I think actually maybe it was you, Assemblymember McCartney, in terms of working with communities and shaping the transition with communities. At our workshop earlier this year, we heard from people, colleagues from the GLA and boroughs and third sector organisations who are doing remarkable work in engaging directly with communities, to have conversations with them. I mean, you know, all the usual stuff around co-producing solutions and people helping to develop that feels the real sense of having a stake in those solutions. And it was brilliant. And then and I was sitting there thinking, but we haven't got the time to do this neighbourhood by neighbourhood throughout all of London. If we're going to stay on this trajectory, this very steep trajectory out to 2030 and beyond. It didn't feel like we had the time to do it. So I think there is an open question, which it's almost playing it back to councillors and the GLA, especially councillors. One of the great things about, I suppose, being a councillor is that you know your communities, and your communities know you. And I think if we can work together to try and understand what is the right level and mechanism of community engagement that delivers that shaping of policies and that buy-in to the trajectory and that sense of trust. That was the one thing that really ran through our workshop again and again and again, that trust between communities and politicians. How can we do it at the right level, yet that is still commensurate with the scale and speed of action needed? So it's not an answer, but it is a concern, and I think we should try and work together to solve that.
That's great. That's a really good question for all councillors, I think, to reflect on. And hand back over to you, Chair.
Thank you very much. We're really tight on time, so we have a section now on GLA initiatives, but I'd like to get to Julianne in 10 minutes. So if I can just encourage you to be brief with your answers, please. Assemblymember Best.
Thank you, Chair. And I was really pleased to hear Member Clark raising that the Conservative MPs are standing up for the 70% of outer Londoners that are against the ULEZ, and also bemused to hear her hold up Camden, the fly tipping hotspot of the UK, as an environmental exemplar. But I just wanted to come first to you, Deputy Mayor. and asks, the GLA appears to have a number of programmes supporting businesses in London to conduct a green transition in their ways of working. How would you characterise their success so far, and are you happy with their progress?
Thank you, Assembly Member Best. Well, those programmes are ones that we're able to pilot in London to show what is needed. So are they delivering everything that we need in London? And I think I've said before, there is absolutely no way that the GLA could do that, nor could individual boroughs do that, and nor could collectively GLA boroughs or everybody on the recovery board do that. We do need those national schemes and national approaches that will provide that sort of foundation, that leadership, that direction that would then get the money moving and give people certainty. But of the schemes that we have been implementing, yes, they have been delivering. Whether it's we've talked about Better Futures and Better Futures Plus, the Advanced London programmes, which are small business support schemes, originally funded through European Commission funding. Some of it funded, topped up by the Mayor through the Green New Deal funding or his own programmes. We can, I'm sure there's a whole list of programmes here with lots of numbers that between me and Catherine we could give you a long list of what's happening. But they are showing what is possible, showing what what are the problems that small and medium-sized enterprises or whoever that we're focusing on are facing, and that so we can either design or recommend to government how they design programmes that would help London and other cities. Whether it is things like, for example, the technical assistance issues. We've been providing technical assistance through our accelerators to local authorities, universities and so on, so that they can provide the business cases on community energy, for example. When the government pulled out of their community energy fund, we replaced it with what we were told was needed, which was the technical assistance, so that community organisations could come up with the feasibility cases and the business cases to get the finance. It wasn't the funding they wanted to do the programmes. It was the ability to go to companies, to finance companies, to say, can you finance this, or do share offers and crowdfunding and so on. So it's those sorts of things that we're learning the lessons from, and then to try to design the bigger programmes in conjunction with local authorities and others, that if we can crowd in the funding from the private sector and from government, that we're sure we can try and increase the pace and scale at the same time as bringing the community along, so that they are telling us what they want to see. And just to flag some of the programmes, like Future Neighbourhoods 2030, where we're trying to design these future neighbourhoods, one in Somerstown, one in Dale. Yeah, Nottingdale, yeah.
So the pilots, you would say, it's more the schemes are to kind of, like say, shows what is possible, attract public, private investment, less about measuring the environmental impact in itself from those schemes, more about less about how in itself that's had a big impact, but more in terms of how many people you can bring on that journey. So how is that something you can measure?
Well, we're measuring both the impact, the environmental impact. So our schemes measure the carbon impact where it's relevant for carbon, or our greening programmes, for example, our programmes on greening will measure access, improving the access for people to green space, the metres squared or square metres of area improved because of sustainable urban drainage or greening or tree
I think that's
cover.
my fault in how I asked the question.
Okay.
Because of course you're measuring the environmental impact, but what I'm saying is I think that the biggest goal, it seems to me, is to show this works and to attract investment either from the public sector, the government, or from the private sector. So how do you measure that?
Well, by the success of attracting finance, I guess. Which we're in the process of doing through, for example, the work that we're doing on green bonds. So part of that climate budgeting process was to collect the pipeline of projects that we could take forward through the functional bodies. We still have to assess those in much more detail, because some of them are, probably more business ready than others and more attractive. Others will need a bit more work to convince investors that they want to finance them. And then, as we've been working, for example, with London councils, the City of London and others through 3CI, which is this sort of commission that's looking at mobilising finance, you have to package those things up, because they're not the things that you want to fund aren't necessarily attractive and will never be attractive to investors because they don't bring returns. They want to pick off and cherry pick, you know, the most attractive returns. We want to bring on lots of different projects so they cross-finance each other. So
how as we as a committee would we scrutinise then that work, like you say? So how would we? Where is that going to be compiled? How do we look at that and see what investment's being brought in as a result of those pilots?
Well, we report on that, don't we? So, you know, when we've launched the Green Bond, you'll be able to see the prospectus of projects that we're putting out, and then presumably the return, what the investors just seek to invest at that point.
Catherine, that's maybe a question to you. I'd be really interested to see those schemes, and many of them have been mentioned in relation to the bigger picture and what the change they've created. Is that a report or a letter or something you can give to us?
Sure, and we've got the progress report coming out for the LES, and that will have some of these examples in there. I mean, I do think it's a really good discipline. It's something that the public sector isn't always completely focused on, is looking back at previous programmes, because we're always so busy delivering our current ones, which we have to do and which we want to do, that we can not always learn the lessons from schemes we've tried in the past. It's something we're looking to strengthen in the environment and energy set up in the GLA by increasing our monitoring and evaluation capacity. And one of the things we'll do is look at schemes that have closed and just see what lessons have come out of that. And actually, I think the sort of interesting question is perhaps not so much about what are we seeing out of the schemes that we're currently running, because they take a while to have an impact. But if you said, you know, the schemes that you closed 2 years ago, what's happened since then? Has anybody taken those ideas, and have they gone national, or have businesses taken them up by themselves? I think would be an interesting question. Might take us a few months or a year to answer, but I think it's what we should ask.
I can give you an example now, though. So
some of the work that we did would really like that, but maybe perhaps in follow-up in writing, just because of
I'll just flag the Centre of Excellence, which government took on.
Yep.
Okay,
yeah.
Thanks. And Shirley, and do you believe the ambition for London to reach net zero by 2030 is realistic?
Yes, and we have to do it. The science demands it. We have to do it. We have to halve emissions. We have to increase our pace. We've got all the challenges that Ashok and Hamid and Mark and Catherine have talked about. We know that, but we're not alone in knowing that. Government knows that as well. What we don't have is the policy framework or the funding framework to all the leadership at national level, I think, to really push that. I think, you know, Ashok, you talked about the intention is probably there, but the policy framework is not. And I think we'd be arguing, you know what the right thing is to do, so just get on with it, or step out of the way of local authorities who want to get on with it, or indeed businesses. And it is a combination of both incentives and regulation, and we think that's a really powerful package, I think, to drive the pace of change that we need.
Ashok, would you agree with the assessment that it's realistic to reach net zero by 2030?
I don't wish to sound trite or flippant, but in a way I'm not prepared to entertain the idea that it is unrealistic given the demands of the situation that we face. Do I think it will be possible to corral the resources and the energy and the partnerships and the policies and everything that we need to corral into a whole society effort to achieve that goal? Yes, I do think it's possible. But I'm not going to say for a second that I think it's going to be anything other than damned hard. But it is achievable. So if we're going to interpret realistic as achievable, then my answer is yes.
And do you believe that London's businesses are doing enough to support that ambition? And if you could be...
I'll be sure. They're not doing enough, but it's not because they don't want to. I think with the assistance that we've all been talking about today, I'm absolutely convinced that London's businesses, small and large, will be enthusiastic in doing what they can to play their part.
Thanks. And Mark, if I could come to you, what mayoral initiatives to support the green transitions have you or do you plan to utilise? What existing initiatives are particularly useful for the hospitality SME sector?
Yeah, well, I guess we things like the Business Climate Leaders Group, which was started about 4 years ago, was certainly helpful, I think, to try and drive the focus in larger corporates. At the time, I was obviously part of a larger corporate, and what I did see was obviously this gap around SMEs, so this is where my focus is today. And I think the Better Futures programme is working really, really well, albeit it's underfunded and it needs to be pushed more. And just goes back to the point from Assembly Member Clark about working together with councils, that they, one of the ladies from the Better Futures team, Jane Mossman, I think she's one day she's in Bexley, the next day she's in Brent, the next day she seems to be covering and so certainly there's a lot of collaboration going on there, so that's good. We've got tomorrow we have our get together for our Environment, Sustainability and Green Growth group, and we've got someone coming to talk about the Mayor's Business Climate Change climate challenge. So again, it would be interesting to hear more on how businesses and certainly the London Chamber can contribute to that. I guess the commercial retrofit area probably needs a bit of a push, again, which is basically one of our key areas, our key focus points, and I guess that's the local councils, the GLA focus, and along with businesses. We want to do it, but again, it's this, we've talked about it already. So there's lots of initiatives. I guess one of the things that keeps coming up is there are lots of initiatives, and clearly it's a very complicated topic, but how does this all kind of fit together? And I guess back to your point about how does this all kind of lead to getting us to net zero, difficult to understand, especially where I'm kind of sitting now, but there's definitely lots of good stuff there. It's just trying to bring it all together and understand how it all fits in. But
thanks. Catherine, quickly, is there some sort of breakdown of the sectors that have benefited from these schemes by a percentage? And if there is or isn't, could you send that to the committee?
Sure, we'd be happy to.
Thank you. And then just finally, Hamid, if you wanted to add anything to that question on mayoral initiatives that you've benefited.
Yeah, I mean that a Better Future Plus was a good program in terms of raising the awareness, and I mean, I don't have any other initiatives in mind at the moment, as I was just covering a very small area in Greenwich. Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you. And for our final section, Assembly Member Davenish.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm going to Julie. I'm going to Julianne. What is the status of the green transition in the hospitality sector in particular? And can you hear me?
I can, yes, yeah. Thank you. Can you hear me?
And yes. And what steps has the hospitality sector in London taken to reduce its carbon footprint, please?
Hi. So first of all, thank you so much to the committee for having me this afternoon, and I'm sorry that I wasn't able to join you in person. Fittingly, I am at a restaurant at the moment. The transition for the hospitality sector is one where there's quite a lot of ambition across the sector and a lot of positive steps that have been taken, particularly by the larger players in the sector, towards understanding the road that they need to go on. And we've seen things like the establishment of the Zero Carbon Forum. We have seen the creation of the Zero Carbon Roadmap and some agreement across large players in the sector around net zero ambitions. However, those ambitions we're still looking at 2030 being only scope 1 and 2, and 2040 being when scope 3 net zero ambitions come into play. And even that, within those ambitions set out by these large businesses and members of the hospitality sector, there's still real challenges around how you achieve those goals. And then specifically on disseminating that down to the SME version of the sector, there are real challenges. So there's ambition, but there are real challenges our sector faces, particularly post-COVID.
Thank you. I was going to ask you what are the key innovations in the sector in London in relation to a green transition, but perhaps you could write to us on that point. A bit of substance and detail would be really great. And because of time, I'm going to move on to my next couple of questions, and I'm going to put them as one. So what are the main benefits to the hospitality sector in London in transitioning to a green and sustainable practice? And can you provide any tangible examples? Again, please feel free to write with more detail. And are there regulatory or other barriers that are inhibiting further transition to more sustainable practices in the hospitality sector, please?
Absolutely. So I think, first of all, in terms of benefits, particularly at the moment that we find ourselves where energy costs are soaring, and the hospitality sector is one which uses quite a lot of energy and gas. There are real benefits towards the transition towards better energy efficient equipment and moving away from gas and towards induction. I'm happy to share more details of that in writing and some examples and case studies, but I think there are real cost incentives for restaurants to transition away from energy intensive equipment. There's also some not frequently cited benefits, including the temperature of the kitchen. And when we are now in an environment in which London reached 40 degrees, and it was extremely hot over the summer, we were looking at unbearable working conditions in kitchens, and those that had switched to electric instead of gas burners actually found that the working conditions for those working were much more pleasant and much more able to stay trading in extreme weather events. So that's kind of one that's not often talked about, but is going to become increasingly important as we continue to deal with warmer and warmer weather. There's also sound benefits for moving away from gas. And so these things where sustainable practices you think of as being motivated by our climate ambitions, but actually they have quite big impacts in the working lives of people that work in restaurants. Adding to your question about the regulatory constraints and frameworks, there are real problems with electrifying kitchens, particularly in old buildings in central London. And it's not always possible to shift to get enough electric supply and things to move to induction hobs. And I know that there are a number of restaurants who have to work quite closely with their landlords, particularly in central London. It's a real challenge. So there's some really great work being done by landlords such as Grosvenor to retrofit the hospitality units within their estate to ensure that that is possible to move away from gas in kitchens.
Thank you. And my final two questions, I'm going to again give them to you together. Will the transition to the green economy disrupt supply chains the hospitality sector relies on? What could be done to limit such disruption? And finally, are the skills needs of the hospitality sector to conduct its green transition being met in your view?
So I think there's a really important thing to note about the hospitality sector, which is that the impact, the carbon impact in particular, of the hospitality sector is really, really strongly weighted towards the supply chain. And so there is no talking about a fully green transition in hospitality without talking about farming in this country. And those things are really, really interlinked. And we must be addressing how we meet our net zero ambitions in farming in order to improve supply chains and availability for restaurants. When it comes to actual buildings, actual scope 1 and 2 emissions, that tends to be less than 20% of the actual footprint of a hospitality business. Sorry, I've got some noise for a moment. Are the skills needed in the sector in order to meet the green transition? I think absolutely. We've got hospitality has an extremely young workforce, which means that actually when it comes to sustainability, our workforce is interested and inclined. Now, we do need more effort put in terms of decarbonizing our menus and skills within sectors like food service and quick service restaurants to move away from our reliance on animal-based products. But beyond that, I think there is capacity within our sector to meet the needs.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, it doesn't really. Yeah.
Really appreciate you being so succinct, and do please write to us, and apologise for rushing you so much at the end of a very long meeting. But thank you. Chair, over to you.
Thank you, Assembly Member Devonish, for doing that at such speed. And thank you, Julianne, for those answers. They're incredibly concise and really, really good. I think Assembly Member Cooper had a brief supplementary.
No.
No, brilliant. Thank you very much to all the Assembly members for your time management this afternoon, and thank you to all the guests that I feel like have constantly been pushing us to be quicker. But Your expertise was very much appreciated, and this was a really, really good meeting that had a lot of depth. Thank you very much. I've got a few items to still go through with my fellow Assembly members, but please do feel free to leave the chamber, although I'll be very quick. Could I ask the committee to note the report and the discussion? Noted. Can we delegate authority to me as chair in consultation with party group lead members to agree any output arising from the discussion? Agreed. Environment Committee work programme. Can I ask the committee to note its work programme and the additional activity undertaken since its last meeting, namely the informal roundtable on the green transition? Noted. Thank you. The next meeting of the Environment Committee is scheduled for 10th of January 2023 at 10 a.m. in the Chamber City Hall. I have no urgent business. Thank you.